Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from, also what time is it. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight when Ellis Grady arrived at the edge of Marrow Creek, a forgotten town not marked on modern maps. He hadn't planned to come here. His car, a stubborn '99 Ford, had broken down a mile back and the GPS flickered, then died, as if the town didn't want to be found. Or left. The road that led to Marrow Creek hadn't been paved in decades, and the trees leaned unnaturally inward like they were listening. The whole place felt like it had been dipped in shadow. Ellis wasn't a man prone to superstition. At 39, he'd buried a mother to cancer, a marriage to neglect, and a writing career to obscurity. He had one published novel and a pile of half-finished ones that gathered dust on his laptop. But something about the old letter in his coat pocket, unsigned, yellowed, found mysteriously in his mailbox, pulled him here like gravity. You don't remember what you did, but the house does. Come to where the road ends. It's time. It sounded like madness. But Ellis had come anyway. Marrow Creek was silent. Not abandoned, exactly. There were houses and signs of life, but no movement. No barking dogs. No humming power lines. The fog hung thick over the streets like wet wool. It didn't move when he did. It waited. The first real sign of life came in the form of a boy. Maybe 8 or 9, barefoot and shirtless in the rain, standing in front of a crumbling red brick house. He didn't blink as Ellis passed. Just stared with eyes too old for his face, and a mouth that moved silently, like he was repeating a prayer no one should hear. Ellis kept walking. He didn't ask why the boy was there. He didn't want to know. The house was at the very end of the lane, where the street cracked and gave way to thick brush. A wrought iron gate stood open, rusted nearly shut with time. Beyond it stood a massive, sagging Victorian mansion that looked like it had been transplanted from a different century, and maybe a different world. 3 stories tall, with turrets like jagged teeth and windows that seemed more like eyes. He should have turned back, but that letter, it buzzed in his pocket like a live wire. The house's front door groaned open without a touch. Inside, the smell was old wood, mildew, and something beneath that Ellis couldn't name. The floor creaked under his boots, and the darkness inside didn't retreat. It thickened. A voice. "Hello," almost kind. "Welcome back, Ellis." He froze. The voice came from the air around him, not ahead, not behind, not above, just there. He called out. "Who's there?" No reply. The front hall stretched into a long corridor that seemed impossibly deep. Portraits lined the walls, each one blackened by rot or time. Some faces had been scratched out. Others looked like they were still forming. One portrait caught his eye, a little girl in a white dress, standing in front of this very house. Her eyes were blank, her mouth stitched shut with thread, no plaque, no name. He turned away, but the sound of fabric tearing followed him. Room by room, the house unfolded, each one stranger than the last. A parlor filled with furniture nailed to the ceiling. A kitchen with dozens of teacups filled with teeth. A nursery where the mobile above the crib spun without wind, playing a lullaby backward. The deeper Ellis went, the more the house changed. The wallpaper blood. The windows no longer showed the outside, just endless, rolling fog. In the dining room, the long table was set for dinner. Plates, utensils, goblets of what looked like red wine but smelled of iron. Around the table sat mannequins dressed in funeral clothes, their heads all turned toward him as he entered, slowly, silently. The chandelier above swayed, though the air was still. He backed out, fast. Something followed. Not footsteps, impressions. The floorboards behind him would dip, one after the other, as if shadowed feet matched his own. When he stopped, so did they. He spun around. Nothing. Until he blinked. Then, for just a second, there was a man in the mirror at the end of the hall. Tall, emaciated, in a black suit too tight on his frame. No eyes, just holes and a grin carved too wide into his face. Ellis blinked again. Gone. But the mirror was now cracked, as if punched from the inside. He returned to the entryway, breath shaking. Maybe the house was just old. Maybe he was letting the atmosphere get to him. But the sense of being watched was crushing. Not from one place, from everywhere. The walls had ears. The air had breath. And that voice again whispering behind him, "You left her. You promised not to forget." But you did. Ellis ran. But he didn't get far. The front door no longer opened. The handle spun and clicked like a dial on a locked safe. He pulled harder, and the wood beneath his hands pulsed. Warm, alive, he staggered back. "This is insane," he muttered. "This isn't real." From the staircase above, a figure appeared. A girl, white dress, same as the portrait. She was maybe 7. Her feet hovered just above the steps. Her head tilted too far, like her neck was broken. She pointed at him with a trembling hand. "You have to remember." "Remember what?" Ellis shouted, heart pounding. She opened her mouth, and hundreds of moths flew out, their wings black and brittle. They filled the hall in a storm of whispering wings before scattering into nothing. And then the girl was gone. The house was playing games, and Ellis knew games. He wrote horror after all, but this wasn't fiction. This was tailored, personal. It knew him. He stumbled into the study, and there, lying open on the desk, was a manuscript. The title, "The Hollow Girl." His name on the cover. But he'd never written that book. He flipped through the pages. Dialogue he didn't remember typing, scenes he didn't recall imagining. Each chapter darker than the last. Torture. Abandonment. A girl left alone in a burning room. A single line underlined in red: "She waited, Ellis. She waited for you." Something cracked above. In the ceiling. Then the walls began to whisper. The words weren't in English. Or maybe they were just too old, too twisted. They spiraled through the wallpaper like vines. Names he almost remembered. Faces he almost recognized. A woman screaming. Fire. A memory. But not his. He grabbed the manuscript and ran again. The corridors no longer led to the same places. Upstairs became downstairs. Doors now opened to brick walls. One led to a room full of clocks, all ticking, but none telling the right time. In one of them, he saw his reflection, but older. Eyes missing, mouth sewn shut, he screamed. Behind him, the same voice again. "Closer, she's still here. You buried her, but not deep enough." "No!" he shouted. But something inside him agreed. He finally found what looked like a bedroom. A large 4-poster bed. The sheets were covered in dust and mold, but the pillow was clean. A single stuffed rabbit rested on top, one ear torn, one eye missing. He remembered that rabbit. Suddenly, it came back, not all of it, just flashes, the fire, the screams, the promise to keep her safe, the guilt that crushed him for years, until he wrote it away, until he forgot. Ellis fell to his knees. "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean." The lights in the room flickered, then died, and in the darkness, a breath behind him. Not air, a presence. He turned, and the girl was there, closer this time. But something was wrong. Her skin was peeled in places, exposing something that glistened. Her hands were too long, her nails dark and cracked. Her mouth opened, not to speak, but to scream. And all the lights in the house burst at once. The house wasn't haunted. Not the way Ellis had always written them. It wasn't filled with ghosts. It was the ghost. A memory given form. A place that fed on forgotten things. And Ellis Grady had forgotten something very, very important. But not for long. Because the house was helping him remember. Piece by broken piece. And the worst was yet to come. The house didn't let him sleep. After the scream, sharp, high, filled with something that didn't belong in a child's throat. Ellis woke on the floor, mouth dry and throat raw. He hadn't remembered falling asleep. He wasn't even sure he had fallen asleep. The last thing he recalled was the girl's face, or what was left of it, coming closer. Then darkness. Then nothing. The room had changed. The bed was gone. So was the stuffed rabbit. In their place stood a single wooden chair facing the wall. Nailed to the wall above it were rows of black and white photographs, none of them framed, all of them water damaged, all of them of him. Different years, different clothes, but always the same expression: confusion, despair, fear. One photo had his eyes scratched out. Another had the word IAR etched across his face with something sharp. But the last one, that one was different. It was dated 10 years ago. It showed him standing in front of the same house, smiling, hand in hand with a girl, not the one from before. Older, 13, maybe 14, pale skin, long black hair, familiar in a way that clawed at his brain, but refused to give shape. The chair creaked as he turned from the wall. He hadn't touched it. He stared at the photo, hands shaking, until the wall behind it began to bulge, soft, like meat under skin. He backed away as the surface warped, groaned, then split. Slowly, deliberately, the wall peeled open like flesh, revealing a narrow staircase descending into a basement that hadn't been there before. There was no logic anymore. The house changed its shape when it wanted, not when he moved. But that didn't matter. The photo in his hand had already set his feet in motion. He had to go down. The steps were slick with mold. The air smelled of old blood and wet stone. Every footstep echoed as if the basement were far bigger than it should have been. As he descended, the light above flickered out, and a low humming began, deep and guttural, like a voice trying to remember how to speak. The basement stretched far beyond the footprint of the house. Its walls were brick, blackened with soot, and the floor was layered with ash. Chains hung from the ceiling. Some were broken, others not. In the center of the space, a fire burned in a pit. But there was no wood, no fuel, just flame, rising from the floor like it belonged there, like it lived there. Shadows flickered along the walls, forming shapes Ellis didn't want to see. People, children, a woman crawling, her hair in flames. And then, on the far side of the fire, a rocking chair moved. Ellis took a step closer. His breath caught. Sitting in the chair was his mother. Dead 3 years, buried in silence, she now rocked slowly back and forth. Her skin sagged, her eyes empty but fixed on him. She didn't smile, didn't move. But when she spoke, the words came from behind him. "You lied to her," the voice said. "Just like you lied to me." He turned. Nothing. Just the fire cracking. His mother rose. Her joints creaked like branches snapping under weight. She stepped through the flame, her skin blackening but never burning. "Mom," he whispered. But it wasn't her. It wore her face, but not the way he remembered. It had too many teeth. And when it smiled, it split from ear to ear. "You left her in the room, Ellis. You knew she was scared." He stumbled back, heart pounding in his ears. "What are you talking about?" But even as he asked, part of him knew. The girl in the photo, that day. The screams. The smoke. He'd buried it, locked it away behind alcohol, behind writer's block, behind time. Now it was breaking through. The creature lunged, and Ellis turned and ran. He didn't look back. He found stairs. Different stairs. And climbed without thinking, without breathing. Behind him, the fire didn't chase, but the smell did. Burnt hair, scorched skin, the sharp sting of betrayal. When he burst through the door at the top, he found himself in the attic. Not the second floor, not a hallway, the attic. The laws of space didn't matter anymore. The room was filled with boxes, dust-covered, labeled, some with years, others with names. One box sat open, marked S. Inside were charred remains of a doll, a music box shaped like a carousel, and a piece of paper. A drawing, crayon on construction paper. It was a picture of him, next to a girl in a white dress. Below it, in a child's hand, me and Daddy. He dropped the paper like it had burned him. "No," he whispered. "That's not possible." His mind scrambled to find solid ground. He'd never had a daughter. He'd never. A whisper behind him, barely audible. "You left me." He turned. The girl stood in the corner. Not broken this time, not monstrous, just sad, small, cold. "Sarah," he said. and the name snapped into place like a puzzle piece. The one he'd never wanted to admit was missing. The fire. She'd been locked in the room, and he'd run. The room pulsed. The walls groaned. A slow heartbeat filled the attic. "You promised you'd be right back," Sarah said. Her eyes were wet. "Not with tears, with ash. I tried to save you. You tried to save yourself." Ellis dropped to his knees. The memories crashed down in waves. The house. The short circuit. The fire that spread too fast. The scream behind the door. The doorknob too hot to touch. And the voice in his head saying, "Run, run. Save yourself." He had listened. Sarah stepped forward. Her body flickered. Child, corpse, shadow. Again and again. "You made them forget me." "What?" "You wrote me away." And it was true. He'd buried her memory. He couldn't face the guilt. So he'd twisted it. Invented a story where she didn't exist. Told the world he was a man alone. Made himself the tragic hero. His first and only bestseller. The Hollow Girl. He didn't realize he was screaming until the room responded. Walls shaking, boxes flying open, papers fluttering like birds with broken wings. The attic shrieked with 100 small voices, and the windows cracked, then exploded outward. Silence. Sarah stood still, watching him, waiting. "What do you want from me?" he gasped. But she didn't answer. She just vanished, and the room changed again. Now he was in the hallway, and the hallway stretched forever. Lights flickered overhead. Doors lined each side, hundreds of them. Each door had a name, none of them his. Some he recognized, people from his life. Some he hadn't thought about in years. Some he'd only seen once. But every one of them had read his book. Every one of them had heard the lie. And at the very end of the hall, one door, blood red, pulsing. He walked, each step heavier than the last. The hallway breathed. And as he reached the final door, he heard her voice again. Not Sarah, not his mother, his own. From a tape recorder on the ground. Playing the words he'd recorded for an old radio interview. "The Hollow Girl is fiction. Pure fiction. I made it up. There's no real person behind the story." He stared at the recorder, picked it up, then crushed it in his hand. The door in front of him swung open. The room inside was identical to the one he'd left Sarah in 10 years ago. Blackened walls, melted toys, and in the center, a small skeleton, curled in on itself, clutching a half-melted rabbit. Ellis fell to his knees, and the room whispered, "For the first time without malice, you remember." His voice was gone, his tears dry. The room began to close. Not just the door, the walls. They bent inward, closing like jaws. And Ellis didn't run. He stayed. Because now, finally he understood this wasn't a haunting. This was penance. The house didn't want him dead. It wanted him to remember, to feel. And now that he did, it had so much more to show him. There was no escape from the house now, not even the illusion of it. The door that led Ellis into the burning nursery had vanished behind him. In its place was blank wall, pulsing with something just beneath the surface, like veins under skin. The light in the room had dimmed, but not gone. A dull, red glow like embers shimmered from cracks in the ceiling. It smelled like smoke and old grief. He stared at the skeleton curled on the floor. The child, sized bones blackened, still clutching that rabbit, and for a moment, Ellis could almost believe the house was silent. Not in peace, but in pause, waiting, listening. He knelt beside the remains. His throat tightened. "Sarah," he whispered. The name was a blade each time it passed his lips. "I didn't mean to, but meaning didn't matter. Not to her, not to this place." Meaning had melted the moment he turned away from the fire 10 years ago and told himself she was already gone. That he couldn't save her. That it wasn't his fault. And then he wrote the story that buried the truth. Buried her. Beneath a lie told well enough to become real. Now the truth sat here, curled in the ashes. The room shifted. No movement, no sound. Just that horrible feeling like gravity tilting. The walls stretched upward, the shadows lengthened, and Ellis turned as a faint light blinked to life in the far corner. A door. Wooden, blackened. slightly ajar. It hadn't been there a second ago. The bones behind him crackled, not from movement, but from the air pressing down, heavier by the second. It was time to move. Beyond the door, the house opened up into something new. A hallway again, but different. Narrower, closer, and lined with picture frames, dozens of them. Unlike before, these frames were clear, photos frozen in glossy stillness. Each one captured a moment from his life. Moments Ellis had tried to forget. The first showed him at 17, sitting beside a hospital bed where his mother coughed blood into a tissue. He was looking away. The second was of his wedding day, though the angle made it clear it hadn't come from the photographer. It was snapped in secret, maybe from the bushes, and it caught the second, just after his wife whispered something that made him frown. The third was a party, one he didn't remember attending. He stood off to the side while people laughed, the punchline of a joke lost on him. In each photo he looked more detached, hollow. The hallway bent. The pictures darkened. Now they weren't photos. They were windows. Ellis paused in front of one and peered through. On the other side, he saw a child's bedroom. His old bedroom. The one from when he was 8. Everything was as it had been: the cracked race car bed frame, the dinosaur posters, the desk covered in unfinished homework. And in the corner, a shadow. It wasn't shaped like anything. It just loomed. But it pulsed with the same low humming he'd heard in the basement. The same kind of sound that seemed to buzz inside your bones, not your ears. He blinked. The window rippled. Now the shadow was in front of the bed, then next to it, then in it. He stepped away, heart hammering. The next window showed a small kitchen. He recognized the chipped green tiles. It was the apartment he'd lived in after Sarah's mother left. She'd only stayed with him on weekends, during the court-approved visitations. He remembered trying to cook spaghetti and dropping the pot. She laughed so hard she cried. But through the window, the kitchen was wrong. The pot boiled over with black sludge. The table was covered in ants. And Sarah sat alone in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, whispering to herself. He pressed his hand to the glass. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were scared." The reflection on the glass twisted, his face changed. It aged, split. His mouth disappeared, and in its place, hers appeared. "You didn't ask," it said. The glass shattered. Ellis reeled back, blood on his palm. The hallway groaned around him like the house had been holding in a breath and finally let it out. A gust of wind tore through the corridor, extinguishing the flickering lights one by one. He ran, not toward safety. There was none. He just ran forward. And as he moved, the house began to change him. His knees burned. His lungs scraped. The walls bent in ways that defied architecture. He passed through a room filled with ticking clocks, all showing different times, all winding backward. Another was filled with cages suspended from the ceiling. Some held rats. Some held dolls. One held a mirror that turned to face him as he passed. He didn't look in. The house whispered louder now. Not words, names. Chanting over and over. "Sarah, Sarah, Sarah." And under that, quieter Liar. Liar, liar. At the end of the new hallway, a door opened before he could reach it. Inside a library. Books towered over him, some nearly 20 feet high. A fireplace glowed with blue flame. But the books, he knew them. Every one, they were his, not just published ones. Even the drafts he never finished, the ones he deleted in shame. They were here, printed and bound and shelved. Each had a name written in red ink across the spine. Not his name, but Sarah's. He reached for one, opened it, blank pages, except one, dead center. "You promised to tell my story." Ellis dropped the book. It hit the floor with a sound like a scream muffled in cloth. The fire in the fireplace rose. Pages began to fly from the shelves, circling him like birds. They brushed his skin, warm, soft, familiar, until one page slapped across his face and clung there. He tore it free and read in the end. He told them she never existed. He erased her. And the world let him. He screamed. and this time the house screamed back. The fire burst into a tower of flame, and the books ignited in unison. He backed away as the entire room burned, but the heat didn't touch him. It just watched. Then, through the fire, a figure emerged. Not Sarah, not his mother, himself, but different. This version of Ellis was charred, clothes hanging in strips, mouth sewn shut with wire. The eyes were holes. And in its hand, it held the manuscript for the hollow girl. The doppelganger stepped closer. Ellis stared at the manuscript and finally saw the truth on the cover. Underneath the printed title, hidden in faint, smudged ink, was the real name of the story, The House That Remembers. The figure extended the book. Ellis took it. And in that moment, the library exploded outward, not in fire, but in sound, voices, screams, laughter. 1,000 versions of Sarah, of himself. Every version he'd tried to forget, every choice he'd denied. All of them shouting the same thing, tell the truth. He ran again. This time, the door didn't vanish. It led to the foyer. Back to where it started. The front door was there again. Unlocked, waiting. He stood before it, breathing heavy, hand on the handle. And for a moment, he almost turned it. Almost. But then he heard the music. A soft lullaby, played on a music box. The same tune Sarah used to hum before she fell asleep. It was coming from the parlor. The very first room he'd walked past when he arrived. He stepped away from the door. The house said nothing. It just listened. Because finally, Ellis Grady wasn't running. He was following. And the truth was waiting, just one room away. The lullaby grew louder with every step Ellis took, its delicate notes echoing through the halls like a memory he didn't want to hold. It wasn't just music, it was her. Sarah. The tune she used to hum while tracing stars on the fogged window of his car, back when weekends still meant something. Before courtrooms, before custody papers, before smoke. Before he chose the fire escape instead of her door. The parlor hadn't changed at all since he arrived. Or maybe it had always looked like this, and he hadn't really looked. The chairs were still nailed to the ceiling. A grandfather clock in the corner ticked backward. Cobwebs hung in thick sheets, but none of the dust dared settle on the center table, where the music box now sat. It was delicate, carved from dark wood, painted with little stars and crescent moons, chipped at the corners. The top was open, and inside, the spinning ballerina twirled slowly to the melody, but her head had been replaced with a porcelain child's face. A perfect copy of Sarah's. Ellis reached for it. The air grew colder as his fingers touched the lid. The music stopped. The ballerina slowed, then snapped still, frozen mid-spin. And then the lid slammed shut on its own. Behind him, the chairs on the ceiling began to rattle. One by one, they twisted loose and crashed to the floor, splintering against the wood, throwing up clouds of dust that smelled like charred memories. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times, though the hands pointed to midnight. A voice, young, uncertain, cracked with betrayal, came from behind the sofa. "You told me stories would keep me safe." Ellis turned. Sarah stood there, but not the twisted, ash-covered ghost. This was the Sarah from the photograph in the attic, the one holding his hand. Her dress was clean, her hair in neat pigtails. But her eyes, they were tired. Not the kind of tired that comes from nightmares. The kind that comes from being forgotten. "I read your book," she said. He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean, you said I was never real." Ellis took a step forward, but she stepped back. "No," she said. "You don't get to touch me yet." He stopped. "Do you know what it's like?" she asked, voice shaking, "to scream behind a door and realize your father's footsteps are running away?" "I was scared, Sarah. I was dying." The music box popped open again. The ballerina spun violently now, too fast. The music twisted out of tune, and a low, mechanical growl joined it, like a tape recording melting in slow fire. Ellis covered his ears, and the walls peeled back. Not figuratively, literally. The parlor split down the center like a cracking shell. The wallpaper curled outward, revealing scenes behind the walls. a hidden life, a buried past. To his left, he saw himself, drunk, slouched at his desk, a glass of whiskey in one hand, Sarah's drawing in the other. He didn't look sad, he looked relieved, because grief with words is manageable. Grief without them is drowning. To his right, Sarah's room, empty, pristine, left untouched. He'd sealed it, told people it was too painful to change. But that was a lie. He kept it frozen so he wouldn't have to see how empty it really was. The cracks spread. Now he saw scenes he didn't remember. A hospital hallway, a nurse crying, a woman, Sarah's mother, screaming into a phone, a courtroom, his hands on a Bible. "I will do everything I can," his voice echoed, "to protect my daughter." The walls shuddered. "You broke that promise," Sarah said. "Not in the fire, before." Ellis dropped to the floor. He wanted to deny it. But what was the point? The house wouldn't let him lie, and Sarah already knew the truth. "I was drowning," he whispered. "You were writing." And she was right. He'd buried himself in stories. Pages became his absolution. He rewrote every detail until even he believed it. Until the girl who died in that room wasn't a daughter, but a character, a plot device, a metaphor. The ballerina snapped off her bass and landed on the floor, shattering. Sarah looked down at it. She screamed when the fire touched her. But it wasn't the fire that killed her. Ellis flinched. "Please, it was the silence," she said. "The silence you left her in." The room began to collapse, slowly at first. Furniture sucked into the floor, paint bleeding down the walls. Chunks of ceiling fell like stones. But Ellis didn't move. He couldn't. Not until she said it. "You still don't remember everything," Sarah whispered. "But you will." She walked toward him. For the first time, she didn't flinch when he reached out. Her hand hovered near his. Cold. Dry. "But when you do," she said, her eyes locking onto his, "you have to tell the truth. No more books, no more lies. You tell my story." He nodded. "I swear." Her face softened. Then the floor gave way. Ellis plunged into blackness. But this time, he didn't scream. He landed hard on something soft. It took him a moment to realize it was snow. Real snow. The air was cold and fresh. The stars overhead shimmered without clouds. He stood slowly, brushing frost from his shoulders. He was outside, somewhere deep in the woods. But the house hadn't let him go. It had changed form. Ahead of him, carved into the hill, stood a cabin. Small wooden, windows shuttered, smoke curled from the chimney, and behind him there were no footsteps. The snow was undisturbed. He was alone. But only for a moment, because inside the cabin a light flicked on, and a voice, his voice, called out from within. "Ellis, come on in. We've been waiting." Ellis stood at the edge of the trees, the chill biting at his face as the snow crunched beneath his boots. The cabin ahead was the only thing in sight, its wooden frame barely lit by the amber glow leaking through its single frosted window. No wind stirred the branches above. No animals cried. It felt like even the forest itself was holding its breath. He turned, half, hoping to see the shape of the house behind him, to have proof that what he just endured was still real, that it hadn't all unraveled inside some twisted dream. But there was nothing, only endless woods and an unbroken field of snow behind him. Not a single track marked where he'd fallen from the parlor. It was like he'd been placed here, dropped into the cold with surgical precision. The light in the cabin window flickered again. A figure moved past it, slow and steady, casting a long, warped silhouette across the snow-covered glass. Then the voice came again. His own, but distant, like a poor recording played over a cracked speaker. "Ellis, you're late." He didn't want to move. Every instinct in his body told him that this place, whatever it was, would not give him comfort or closure. It would cost him something. But standing still felt worse. The cold was finding its way under his skin, and beneath it, fear was turning into something mean and hot. So he walked. The door wasn't locked. It opened with a heavy groan, like the wood had been holding in a scream. Inside, The cabin smelled like pine and scorched metal, not burning wood, something more sterile, more surgical. There were no clocks, no ticking, not even the faint rhythm of pipes or wind. But there were voices, soft at first, rising like breath in the silence. Ellis stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The sound didn't come from a speaker or a room. It came from the walls, whispering words that weren't quite in sync, fragments of his own thoughts. "You said it was just a power surge. I'll check on her in 5 minutes. She's just a little scared. She'll fall asleep soon. I don't need help. I'm fine." Each line pricked like a needle. They weren't things he'd written. They were things he'd said. The cabin was one room, a small bed, a desk covered in burned pages, a mirror propped in the corner, and sitting on the bed, himself. Ellis stared at the man on the mattress. Same face, same gray in the beard, same scar on the wrist from that summer with the broken glass. But this version of him was off. The eyes didn't blink. The chest didn't rise. It was like looking at a wax figure, frozen in the act of waiting. "You took long enough," the figure said. The voice was his, but flatter, more brittle. Ellis didn't speak. He couldn't. "You don't remember this part?" the figure said. "This is where it gets worse." Then the figure blinked. Once, slowly, and the walls pulsed with heat. The whispering grew louder. The mirror in the corner shifted. Not the reflection, the glass itself. Like something behind it was pressing forward, trying to step through. "What is this place?" Ellis asked, finally finding his voice. The figure on the bed stood. It moved like a puppet, all joints and tension, without fluidity. "This is the room you wrote and then forgot. The one you buried beneath clever endings and sad metaphors. This is where you watched her burn and chose to tell a different story." Ellis backed away. "I didn't watch. You did." The figure gestured to the mirror. "Look." He turned slowly. The mirror no longer showed the room. It showed the night, the fire, and the hallway leading to Sarah's door. Only this time Ellis was there, his younger self, standing outside her room with his hand on the knob. The smoke wasn't thick yet. The flames were still small. He could have opened it, but he didn't. He froze. He listened to her scream, and then he ran. "No," Ellis whispered, shaking his head. "I told myself it was too late." The mirror showed him again, standing at the front door of the house. He looked back once, then stepped outside. "Do you know what story you wrote, Ellis?" The Doppelganger said from behind him. "You didn't write about grief. You wrote an alibi, a myth about a man who never had a daughter, a man who survived a house fire with nothing left but his broken dreams and a typewriter." The mirror cracked. The illusion broke, and the forest outside the cabin screamed. Not a sound of pain, but a memory, returning all at once. Ellis fell to his knees, and he remembered everything. Sarah asking if she could sleep with the light on, her voice through the door. The way he laughed and said, "You're a big girl now, you're fine." The scent of burning wire. The split-second moment where he thought he had time to grab his laptop. The papers, just a second. But that second cost her everything. He hadn't just left her. He'd paused. He'd hesitated. And in that pause, the fire took her. The figure beside him crouched down, no longer speaking, just watching. Ellis sobbed. The kind of sob that comes from marrow. The kind that rewrites you. And the cabin whispered one final line. "If you can't carry the truth, it will carry you." The mirror shattered completely. The walls peeled back again. And beyond the cabin, no longer woods, no longer snow, was the house. But now, it was burning. A perfect recreation of that night. Every window lit with orange rage. Every scream echoing across the lawn. Sarah's voice, calling for him. This time, he ran toward it. Toward the flames. Toward the truth. Because running away was what built this house. And only fire could tear it down. Ellis didn't hesitate. The snow was gone. The cabin behind him had folded into the earth like it was never there. And ahead, the house loomed again. But not quiet, not still. It burned like it had 10 years ago, its bones ablaze, its mouth wide open, howling in flame. Every window spilled fire like a scream held too long, and the smoke roiled upward in thick, wet coils, blacking out the sky. The lawn in front of it, once damp with fog, now hissed with falling ash. The ground itself looked scorched, but this time he ran toward it. The front door was wide open, spewing heat and smoke in waves that stung his eyes and flayed his skin. But Ellis pushed forward, teeth clenched, fists closed. Not because he thought he could save her, not anymore, but because running away was the sin that started all of this. Now, if there was even a whisper of redemption, it lived in the flames. The air inside was thicker than he remembered. It tasted like regret. Hot, metallic, full of ghosts. The house was the same layout, but everything glowed in red and orange. The wallpaper peeled like skin. The staircase sagged. The portraits on the wall melted, the faces liquefying into warped grins. Above the roar of the inferno, he heard her. "Daddy," a small voice, so clear it didn't belong here. Untouched by the smoke, he turned left, past the old parlor now consumed in fire. The ceiling had caved in, the nailed-up chairs now just burning stumps on the floor. A chandelier hung by a single chain, swaying like a pendulum over the wreckage. He kept running. "Daddy, where are you?" That voice, it hadn't changed. It wasn't the charred whisper from the hallways, or the quiet judgment from the attic. It was Sarah as she had been. Soft, scared. "Sarah!" he yelled. The hallway stretched impossibly long. Every door on either side slammed open as he passed, revealing rooms full of smoke, fire, and faces. All his faces. Different versions of him in different stages of life. All watching. None moving. One smiled. It was the Ellis from the cabin. The one who wrote the lies. He sat calmly in a rocking chair inside a burning room, sipping from a glass that melted in his hand. He didn't look at the flames. He looked at Ellis. "You already failed," he said, and the words came out in ash. Ellis ignored him. He pressed on. The hallway ended at Sarah's door. The same white paint, now blistered and cracked. The doorknob was glowing. Last time, he hadn't touched it. This time, he grabbed it. The heat tore through his palm like acid, but he didn't let go. He twisted hard and shoved. The door flew open, and the fire parted, just for a second. Inside, her room was untouched. Everything just as she left it. Stars on the ceiling. Books stacked under the window. The little nightlight glowing faint blue. And there, in the middle of it all, stood Sarah. She wasn't burned, not broken, just standing in her nightgown, barefoot, hair messy from sleep. Ellis stepped inside. The second his foot crossed the threshold, the fire closed in behind him like a wave crashing shut. The door vanished. Sarah looked up at him. "You came back," she said, not accusing, just surprised. "I'm sorry," he breathed. "I should have never left you." She nodded slowly. "I know." He dropped to his knees. "I tried to forget you because remembering was killing me. But forgetting it made everything worse." She stepped forward. Her little hand reached out and touched the burn blistering on his palm. "I was scared," she said. "But not of the fire." Ellis met her eyes. "Then what?" "I was scared you didn't love me enough to stay." The house groaned around them. The ceiling cracked. The window shattered outward. Flames licked the walls now, crawling like veins. He pulled her into his arms, held her tight. "You were everything. I was just too weak to carry it." "You don't have to carry it anymore," she said. The light in the room dimmed. The fire was still there, still roaring, but it no longer reached them. A kind of stillness settled. Not peace, but acknowledgement. The moment stretched. And then she let go of him. Stepped back, smiled. "Now you remember." He nodded. His chest felt like it was collapsing inward. Sarah looked around the room. "You need to finish the story, Daddy. The real one." "I will. Promise." This time he didn't hesitate. "Promise." And she vanished, no scream, no ghostly twist, just gone. The fire returned instantly, violent and hungry. The walls collapsed, the bed burst into flame, and Ellis threw himself to the floor, curling into the only safe space left, his mind. The pain came in waves, not just from the heat, but from the weight of it all. The memories, the failure, the truth, the story, and then silence. No fire, no smoke. Ellis opened his eyes. He was in a hospital room, bright, sterile. The whir of machines somewhere nearby. But not his hospital. Not from any memory. This was the next place the house wanted to show him. Because it wasn't finished yet. On the bed in front of him lay another version of himself. Burned. Wrapped in bandages. Tubes in the mouth, barely breathing. Ellis stepped closer. And this version, the broken, near, dead version, opened its eyes, whispered one word, right, and flatlined. The monitors screamed. The lights exploded, and the house returned. Now darker, angrier, and far from done, because the next room was ready, and it remembered everything. He woke up drowning in darkness. Not the kind of darkness that simply obscures. This one pressed in from all sides, thick and living, like it was watching him try to breathe. There was no floor beneath him, no ceiling above. Just black space stretching endlessly in every direction. At first, Ellis thought he might have died in the fire, that the house had finally consumed him whole. But then he heard it again. The sound that had become too familiar. Footsteps. But not his, pacing in a circle around him, impossibly close, yet always just out of reach. The fire was gone. So was Sarah. The walls, the voices, the faces, all erased in the blink of an eye. In their place a void that hummed low and steady, vibrating with tension. He could feel the weight of what was coming next. Not because the house warned him, but because it stopped warning him, and that was worse. A flicker of light appeared in the distance, a pinpoint no bigger than a match head. It didn't glow, it pulsed, like it was sensing with something inside him. Heartbeat by heartbeat it grew. Ellis moved toward it, slowly at first, then faster. As the blackness behind him grew colder, he didn't know if he was walking or falling forward. He only knew he had to reach the light before the dark remembered he was there. The closer he got, the more he realized the light wasn't suspended in air. It came from beneath a door. A door that didn't belong in a place like this. It was heavy oak, worn smooth by age, the brass handle blackened and scratched. A small plaque sat at eye level, one word etched deep DC's owns. Ellis hesitated, not out of fear, but because some part of him already knew what waited behind it. He opened the door. Inside was a hallway, but not like the others. No twisted dimensions, no melting walls, no impossible turns. This one was plain, white walls, hardwood floor. A line of doors on either side, every one identical. Each door bore a nameplate, and each nameplate bore a choice. The night you stayed, and she lived the time. You told the truth, the chapter you never wrote. The daughter you could have raised. Ellis stared, stunned. The hallway was filled with versions of his life. Forks in the road he never took. He stepped toward the first door, hand trembling. The night you stayed and she lived. That was the lie he told himself sometimes on the good days. The dream he twisted into fiction. But here it waited behind a door. He opened it. Inside a living room, small but warm. A fireplace. A birthday cake. A child laughing. Sarah. Older, maybe 15 now, sitting on the floor surrounded by wrapping paper. He was there too, reading aloud from a novel she wrote. The air was thick with joy. Ellis reached out, but his hand passed through the scene. Like smoke. Like memory. It wasn't real. Just a projection of what could have been. The second he blinked, the room vanished, the door closing behind him with a soft click. He turned to the next. The time you told the truth. This one cut deeper. Inside a courtroom. A therapist. A publisher's office. Conversations where he admitted everything. Cried. Took responsibility. There were consequences. Loss of reputation. Lawsuits. Exile from the world he once used to hide from himself. But there was also something else. Peace. Peace in the wreckage. He moved on. Each door was a different life. One where he never wrote again. One where he changed genres entirely. One where he stayed in therapy. one where he lived alone in a cabin, haunted but honest. Each showed a slice of the man he could have been. Each left him emptier than the last. But the hallway had no end. No matter how far he walked, more doors appeared, and the whispers returned. Not Sarah's. Not the house. His. Echoes of things he'd said to justify it all. There was nothing I could do. She would have wanted me to move on. It's just a story. They don't need the truth, just a good ending. The hallway curved subtly and began to descend. The light overhead dimmed. Doors began to rot. Nameplates rusted. The titles grew more desperate. The lie you started believing. The page you should have burned. The moment you let her scream alone, he opened the last one. There was no room this time. No memory. Just a mirror. It showed the present. Him standing alone. But his reflection wasn't still. It aged. It broke. It twisted. The eyes grew hollow. The mouth disappeared. Over and over, a cycle of becoming something less. He turned away, and the hallway began to close behind him. The doors slammed shut one by one with thunderous cracks until he stood in a small, round chamber lit by a single bulb hanging from a fraying cord. A chair sat in the center. On it, a typewriter. A page already loaded, blank. Next to it, a pen, but no ink. And against the far wall, scribbled in what looked like blood, "You can't change the past, but you can bleed the truth from it." He sat. The moment he touched the keys, the room locked him in. The bulb flared, then dimmed, steady as breath. He didn't know what the house wanted anymore. Punishment, a confession, redemption, maybe all three, maybe none. Maybe this was the only way it knew how to let him feel. He stared at the blank page and began to type. Not a story, not a novel, a memory, one sentence at a time. I left her because I was afraid. I told myself I'd come back. But I didn't. I ran. I heard her scream and froze. I wrote her out of my life to spare myself. And then I let the world believe she never existed. The typewriter clacked in time with his heart. The page drank each truth, and for every word he pressed into the keys, something in the room loosened. The whispers softened. The walls breathed. But it wasn't forgiveness. It was acceptance. By the time the first page was full, the typewriter stopped working. The ribbon snapped. The bulb overhead sparked and popped, plunging the room into shadow again, but not total darkness. A door opened behind him. Wooden, simple. Ellis stood, carrying the page with him. It was warm still, heavy in his hand like it mattered. The new room was familiar. Sarah's room. Again, but empty, peaceful. On the bed, her rabbit, untouched, clean, and on the wall above the headboard, her drawing of them together. It had changed. Now the picture showed the house behind them, whole, but dark. And in Sarah's hand, instead of the rabbit, was the page he just wrote. She was holding his confession. Ellis sat on the edge of the bed, the exhaustion finally catching up to him. The room didn't shake. The house didn't scream. Instead, a voice, not hers, not his, came from the ceiling. Gentle, unfamiliar. You've seen the endings, but now you must choose which one to carry. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He folded the page, stood, and walked through the final door, outside. For real this time. The sky was overcast, the fire gone. The house behind him stood quiet, not gone, but no longer hostile. Just a building now. Still, heavy, waiting for whatever came next. Ellis didn't turn to look at it. He just kept walking. Because the house had shown him something worse than death, worse than fire, worse than memory. It had shown him what happens when you make silence your God. And now he would write again, not to be read, but to be true. The first thing Ellis noticed was the silence. Not the house's brand of silence, not the heavy, pregnant hush of a room that wanted to hear your heart break, but a real quiet. A stillness that suggested a world unshackled from screaming walls and whispering portraits. The kind of silence that once might have comforted him. But now, it only made the weight of his breath feel louder. He was no longer in the hallway of doors, no longer holding Sarah's drawing, or sitting in the room she had once called safe. The air was too clean, the light too even. He looked around, disoriented, before it clicked. A studio. Not the kind used for filming. This one had the set design of something far more calculated. A talk show? Maybe. There was a curved stage lined with soft carpet, 2 chairs facing each other beneath a circle of warm lights. A small table between them with a glass of water on each side, beads of condensation already forming. And behind it all, an audience of empty chairs. Not a soul sat in them. Not a soul needed to. Because the lights shifted, and across from him, the other chair creaked as someone took a seat. Ellis froze. He hadn't seen him walk in. But there he was, calm, suited, clipboard in hand, as if this were just another interview slotted between rehearsals and a quick lunch. The man was tall, silver-haired, with eyes like stained glass. They didn't move the way normal eyes did. They held too still, studied too precisely. Ellis Grady, the man said with a smile that didn't touch anything behind it. It's time we had a conversation. Ellis didn't sit. He didn't move. He had seen things that bent reason and memory. He'd held the truth in his hands while the walls burned around him. But this, a talk show set, an immaculate interviewer in a place that had no business having power lines or working lights. This was something worse. This was familiarity weaponized. "Where am I?" Ellis asked. His voice sounded smaller than it should have. He hated how it cracked. The man gestured to the chair across from him. "Somewhere between now and then. Sit down. Let's not waste this." Something about the way he said this made Ellis's throat tighten. He sat. The lights grew slightly warmer. The man clicked the pen in his hand once, twice, then began. "You're a writer, Mr. Grady. Or at least you used to be." Ellis didn't respond. "You sold a story that people loved. That made them cry. That made them believe. But you left out the part where it was stolen." "I didn't steal it," Ellis said, though it sounded weak even to him. "It was mine. I lived it." "No. You survived it. You didn't write her story. You rewrote your guilt." Alice looked away, eyes falling on the audience seats. Empty rows stretched to shadows. But every now and then, a shape flickered there. A silhouette. Watching. "Let's walk through it," the man continued. "You wrote The Hollow Girl under the pretense of fiction. A grieving man. A metaphor. A haunting that never quite gave itself a name." Ellis clenched his fists. "But we both know that girl had a name." "Sarah," Ellis said quietly. The man smiled wider. "That's right. You're remembering better now." Ellis blinked, and when his eyes opened again, the set had changed. The chairs remained, but now they were surrounded by shelves, filled with books, all of them his. Same title, different languages. Translated, adapted, celebrated, bestseller stickers, awards, endorsements. "You made a career off grief," the man said. "And you never once told the world that grief had a face." Ellis swallowed the heat rising in his throat. Would it have helped? If I had told them the truth, what would it have changed? The man leaned forward. "It wouldn't have changed what happened, but it would have changed you." Ellis shook his head. "I was falling apart. No one wanted to hear about a man who abandoned his daughter in a fire. That's not what you did." Ellis looked up stunned. "It's not." The man's voice softened. "You hesitated. And in that hesitation, she died. There's a difference. One is cruel. The other is human." Ellis gripped the arms of the chair. "Then why does it feel the same?" The interviewer didn't answer. Instead, he clicked his pen once more and shifted the clipboard. "Let's talk about your second book," he said. "The one you never published." Ellis flinched. No one was supposed to know about that. The manuscript had never seen light. He'd written it during the worst nights, the ones where sleep dared not visit. Pages filled with memories, dreams, distorted recollections. He never meant for anyone to read it. It was raw, incomplete, honest. "How?" he started, but the man raised a hand. "You named it Sarah's Silence." "Why?" Ellis looked away. "Because I didn't know how to write her voice. I was afraid of getting it wrong." The man tilted his head, You feared dishonoring the truth. Yes. And yet you felt nothing dishonoring her with a lie. That stung. But it wasn't wrong. I wanted to believe the lie, Ellis said. That if I just kept writing, I could erase what I did. Rewrite it until I could live with it. But you couldn't. Ellis nodded slowly. No, he whispered. The set changed again. Now the backdrop was his old study, the one from the apartment he lived in right after the fire. The desk. The bottle. The photo of Sarah half, covered by bills and drafts. He could smell the stale coffee, the printer ink, the guilt. The man didn't flinch. You remember this place? Ellis nodded. It's where you began to forget her. Ellis stared at the photo. I never forgot. You buried her. Same thing. The lights dimmed again. Ellis felt something stir in the seat behind him. He didn't dare turn around. The man's voice dropped, low and cutting. You thought you could bargain with the house. That if you remembered her, if you suffered enough, it would let you leave. But this place, it doesn't deal in pain. It deals in truth. Ellis opened his mouth to respond, but the air had gone thick. The studio was fading, or rather peeling. The walls dissolved into shadow, the chairs turned to ash, and the interviewer, still seated, still watching. This is the part they never see, he said, the part that doesn't fit into a chapter. The part that lives in the quiet between screams. Ellis stood. I don't want to tell stories anymore. Yes, you do, the man said, standing too. But not to escape, not to forget. Now, you write to remember. That's the difference. The shadows reached the floor. Only the table between them remained. One of the glasses of water had vanished. The other was full. The man gestured. Ellis approached. Inside the water, floating near the bottom, was a page. He reached in, pulled it out. One sentence, written in Sarah's handwriting. If you tell them who I was, I won't be afraid anymore. The water dripped from his fingers, cold. Clear, real. When he looked up, the man was gone. So were the chairs. He was back in the house. Only now it was raining. A slow, steady patter from a leaking roof above. The fire was gone. The portraits had stopped watching. The walls no longer whispered. The house wasn't angry. It was tired. He walked room to room. Nothing chased him. No figures appeared in mirrors. No doors slammed shut. The house was letting go. And in the foyer, where he first entered what felt like lifetimes ago, a suitcase sat waiting, his. Beside it, an envelope. He picked it up. Inside the manuscript page he wrote in the typewriter room. The truth, the start of Sarah's story. No edits. No red lines. Only her name, underlined in soft pencil. And on the back, a note in a child's handwriting. Finish it, and don't forget to say I like the stars. Ellis smiled. The first real one in years. He stepped outside. The sky was gray. Not the heavy, haunted fog of before, but rain clouds. Honest ones. The house behind him didn't vanish. It didn't collapse. It simply stood still. Waiting. Always there. A place not of horror, but memory. A reminder. Ellis didn't look back. He walked. Not toward safety. Not toward redemption. But toward the page. Because now he knew what to write. And who he was writing it for. The sky was ash gray when Ellis stepped into town again, though calling it a town felt generous. It wasn't marked on any map. There were no road signs, no passing cars, no people on sidewalks. Just buildings left to sag under the weight of memory. Glass storefronts dulled with dust, and lampposts that hadn't lit up in years. It was a place that shouldn't have existed, and yet, somehow, it waited for him like a stage set between acts. Unchanged, untouched, unwanted by time. He didn't know how he got there. One moment he was stepping away from the house, suitcase in hand. The next he was here, boots clapping softly against cracked pavement, street after empty street watching him pass like a jury that had already delivered its verdict. No wind. No voices. Just that unshakable feeling that every shadow had a pulse. At the end of the block, tucked between a boarded, up tailor and a butcher's shop that smelled of old rust, stood a bookstore. No sign. No name. Just a glass door with a handwritten note taped to it. We only sell stories worth telling. Ellis stared at it for a long time. He should have kept walking. But something deep inside, the part of him that once believed writing could be more than a mask, told him that if he wanted to finish Sarah's story, he needed to go inside. The bell above the door didn't ring when he entered. The shop smelled like old paper and something faintly sweet, like fading vanilla. The light inside was dim but warm. The walls were lined with bookshelves that reached the ceiling, each one packed edge to edge with hardcovers bound in cracked leather and cloth that looked hand-stitched. There was no counter, no clerk, no register, just books. Rows and rows of them, silent and waiting. At the center of the room sat a table with a single book lying on it. Ellis approached cautiously. The book had no title, no author. Its cover was smooth, matte black, and it pulsed faintly under the hanging lamp as if it were breathing. A folded note rested beside it, written in that same familiar childlike handwriting. You can't tell a story without reading the ones you've forgotten. His fingers trembled as he opened the book. The first page was blank. Then words appeared, letter by letter, as if drawn by an invisible hand. Not typed, not printed, etched. Chapter 1, the first time you lied to her. He turned the page. It was the living room from when Sarah was 5. She stood near the window, looking up at a sky scribbled with storm clouds. Ellis was on the couch, phone in hand, telling her mother over voicemail that of course everything was fine. That Sarah was happy, that she didn't ask about her anymore. But Sarah had been listening. She didn't cry. She just looked away. He turned the page. Chapter 2, the time you let her sleep with fear. Now she was 8. Her room was darker than it should have been. The nightlight had flickered and gone dead days ago, but he hadn't bothered to replace it. He'd said he would. She'd asked twice. On the third time, she gave up. That night, she didn't sleep, just sat up, wide-eyed, listening to every creak in the hall. And Ellis, on the other side of the door, was too drunk to notice. He kept turning pages, each one sliced deeper. The lies weren't the grand, world-breaking kind. They were the little ones, the broken promises, the ignored moments, the silences he convinced himself were harmless. And with each truth exposed, the air in the bookstore grew heavier. The walls began to whisper, not like the house. This wasn't rage or warning. It was remembrance. Soft voices reciting lines from the book as Ellis read them. Every corner of the shop echoed with pieces of his failures. But none were judgmental, none cruel, just there, present. Like memories that had finally stopped hiding, he turned the page again. This time, there was a drawing, a child's sketch of a burning house. Stick figures outside. One stood watching. The other inside, hand against the window, surrounded by flames. Underneath, in red crayon, he ran. Ellis dropped the book. His stomach lurched, bile rising in his throat. He stumbled backward, knocking over a stool that hadn't been there before. The whispers paused. He knelt on the floor, breathing heavy, eyes stinging. I get it, he whispered. I know what I did. But the book wasn't finished. As he reached for it again, something fell from between the pages. A photograph. It was real, glossy, cold. Sarah, maybe 4 years old, sitting on his shoulders, both of them laughing in a park. A moment he had completely forgotten. Her smile was full, whole, untouched by what would come. On the back, in small, careful print, don't just write about how I died. Write about how I lived. That's when he understood. He hadn't been summoned here to wallow. This wasn't a museum of regret. This was permission. To remember everything. Not just the fire, not just the mistake, but her. All of her. The bookstore lights flickered. The book on the table slammed shut, and from the shadows at the back of the store, a shape stepped forward. A girl. 10, maybe 11. Not the ghostly version that haunted him. Not the burned echo. A memory made solid. Sarah. She didn't speak. She just held out her hand. In it, a pencil. Ellis took it, and on the same table, a notebook appeared. He didn't question it. He opened it to the first page and wrote Sarah liked to watch thunderstorms. She said the sky was telling stories with its voice. She wasn't afraid of the dark, not really. She just didn't want to be alone in it. He kept writing, and with each word, the room grew brighter. Not artificial light, sunlight, golden and soft. The front window of the bookstore had cleared. Outside, the street shimmered. Life returned to the town like water breaking through dry earth. The buildings stood straighter. Color returned to the bricks. A dog barked in the distance. A bike lay on the sidewalk, wheels spinning lazily in the breeze. Ellis didn't stop. He wrote about the time they baked cookies and burned them so badly they stuck to the tray. He wrote about how she called snails shell puppies. He wrote about her favorite book and how she'd fall asleep holding it like a teddy bear. And then he wrote about the fire. This time, without excuses, without softening, without guilt hiding behind metaphor. He wrote the truth, the moment he froze, the step he didn't take, the price she paid, and the years he spent erasing her in ink while pretending he was honoring her. When he finished the last sentence, the bookstore fell silent again, but this time it was a clean silence, one that left room to breathe. Sarah was gone. The book lay closed on the table. A cover now graced it. A real title, The Girl Who Watched the Sky, by Ellis Grady. He picked it up. It felt light, not because the weight of guilt was gone, but because the weight of memory had finally settled in its rightful place. He stepped outside, and the world was waiting. Not the world that rejected him, not the one he'd built from lies, the real one, the messy, flawed, beautiful world where people failed and tried again. He didn't know what would happen next, whether people would forgive him, whether he deserved it, but he would keep writing, not for fame, not for penance, but for Sarah, because her story wasn't finished. And now, finally, it could begin. The day Ellis mailed the manuscript, the sky opened like it was grieving with him. He stood beneath the rusted awning of the town's only post office, if it even was a post office. The sign above the door had long since faded to pale wood, the words peeled away by weather and years. But inside, behind the counter where cobwebs collected and dust hung like fog, an old mail slot still sat, stubborn and waiting. He held the envelope in both hands, fingers trembling, not from cold, but from the sheer weight of what was inside. Not just paper, not just ink. Her. He had written the truth. Finally. And now, with no guarantee it would be seen or understood, he was about to let it go. Outside, the rain drummed on the roof with a steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that had kept time long before he walked into this cursed town, and would continue long after he left. The world didn't care about apologies. It didn't move for sorrow or stall for regret. But maybe, just maybe, it made room for stories that told the truth. He slipped the envelope into the slot. It disappeared without sound. No receipt, no confirmation. But the moment it vanished, the storm outside changed. The rain didn't stop. It softened. No thunder, no wind. Just a quiet rain, gentle and steady, cleansing. Ellis stepped outside and didn't bother with cover. He let it soak him. The water ran through his hair, down his back, into his boots. He stood there, blinking up at the sky like it was trying to say something. He didn't cry. He'd done that already, deep inside the house, in rooms that didn't forget, where screams echoed from ceilings that bled names. There were no tears left, just resolve. He turned toward the road. It wasn't the same one he came in on. The cracked gravel path that once brought him here, lost and hopeless, was gone. In its place stretched a clean, winding road, slick with rain but open, straight and empty. No buildings, no signposts, just the road, the trees, and the sound of distant birds returning. He began to walk. The rain soaked the notebook under his arm, but he didn't cover it. He'd written Sarah's truth on every page. If the water wanted to touch it, that was fine. Let the sky know her too. As he walked, something changed in the air. It wasn't temperature. It was memory. It rose like mist from the earth, curling around his boots, whispering along the road. Not painful now, just present. The house had broken him open, carved his guilt into glass and made him stare through it. But it hadn't killed him. It needed him to walk this road, because Sarah wasn't finished. And the house, as much as it had punished him, hadn't been cruel without purpose. It had warned him, shown him, given him pages soaked in horror so he could finally find the one thread worth holding on to. Her voice, her laugh, her impossible, beautiful way of seeing the world. The road curved gently ahead. At its bend stood a bench, weathered, old, out of place, but familiar. Ellis paused, then sat. The moment he did, a mailbox appeared across from him. Just a standard blue box, dented and rusted at the corners. But real, solid. The flag was up. He blinked, reached across. Inside, there was one letter, no stamp, no address, no handwriting. He opened it. Inside a single piece of paper, typed, "If you could do it all over again, would you open the door?" He stared at the words. For a long time. The door. Sarah's door. 10 years ago, he froze. He turned away. He saved himself. But if he could change it now, he looked around. The rain had stopped. Mist drifted lazily across the grass. The woods behind him were still. He didn't answer the letter. He folded it, tucked it into the notebook, because the answer wasn't for him. It was for her. And he wasn't done writing. He stood, kept walking. The road narrowed, twisted. And the further he went, the stranger it became. Not in the house's way, but in the way time feels when you revisit places from childhood, when scale doesn't match memory, when everything seems both smaller and more sacred. Trees he swore he recognized, a crooked fence, a mailbox with a dent in the exact shape of a baseball. He stopped cold. It was his street. From 30 years ago. The house at the end. The one with the red door and the swing set. His house. He hadn't seen it since he was 17. He approached slowly. The porch light was on, and inside the flicker of a television danced against the window. His heart raced. Not in fear, in anticipation. He stepped onto the porch. The door creaked open before he touched it. Inside his childhood, unchanged. The old brown carpet, the lumpy green couch, the wooden ducks on the mantel, the smell of popcorn and laundry, and there, sitting on the floor, himself. 7 years old, watching cartoons. The child didn't turn, didn't acknowledge him, but beside him, legs crossed, was a little girl. Sarah, not burned, not broken, just there, laughing. Ellis stepped forward. Neither child reacted. He wasn't here to change anything. He was here to see, to remember. They were watching some old animated show. Bright colors, loud voices, nonsense. But Sarah clapped her hands. The young Ellis said something. She giggled. He offered her a piece of candy from his pocket. She shook her head, then took it anyway. Ellis smiled. This was her. Before everything. Before the pain. He sat on the couch, let the moment wash over him. And for the first time since the house, he didn't feel heavy. He felt present. The memory didn't last. The room faded. The children dissolved into fog. But it didn't feel like loss. It felt like completion. When the room cleared, he was back on the road. The notebook still in his hand. Only now, the cover had changed. Where once it was blank, now a title glowed in gold ink, The Story She Left Behind, by Ellis Grady, and beneath it, in smaller script told together. He opened to the last page. There was a note he didn't write. When you get there, tell them everything. Not just the bad parts. Tell them about the thunder and the stars. Tell them about the girl who wanted to name every snail. Tell them what it means to remember without turning it into punishment. If they listen, I won't be alone anymore. The notebook closed itself. The road reached its end. And there, waiting, was a small white house. Modern, clean, peaceful. A publishing office. Glass doors, welcoming light. Inside, people sat at desks, reading manuscripts, sipping coffee. And at the far end, a reception desk. He walked in. The woman behind the desk looked up and smiled. "Mr. Grady, we've been expecting your submission." He handed her the notebook. No words. She took it gently. Read the cover. Her smile softened. Thank you, she said. He turned to leave. But before the door closed behind him, he heard her whisper. She's going to help a lot of people. Outside, the sky broke open, and for the first time in a decade, the sun poured down. Ellis stepped into the light. Not fixed, not whole, but true. And that was enough. The sun had finally returned, but Ellis couldn't tell if it was real or just another illusion offered by whatever strange balance of mercy and memory governed this place. The light was warm. The streets were dry. The people who passed him smiled politely, offering nods like nothing strange had ever occurred here, like no house had screamed his name from the baseboards or cracked the sky in grief. And maybe, for them, nothing had. Maybe this version of the town, now clean and living, didn't remember the blood on its floorboards. But he did. He carried it in his breath, in his ribs, in the silence that followed him even when the birds began to sing again. He didn't know where he was walking now, only that he wasn't done. The notebook had been handed over. The story had been told. And yet something inside him twisted with unease, like a thread still tangled, refusing to come undone. Sarah's final note had said to tell everything. Not just the pain, not just the stars, but something remained. He felt it the way you feel a storm before the clouds gather, pressure behind the eyes, air too still, too perfect. His feet led him down a side street, past a newspaper stand that still sold last week's headlines, and into a cull, sack-lined with houses that hadn't been updated since the 90s. Each one identical. Perfect lawns, plastic flamingos, closed curtains. At the far end sat a house with a single light flickering behind the curtain. Something about it pulled him like gravity. He didn't knock. The door opened the moment he touched it. Inside, the air was stale, and the television was on. No channels, just static. Ellis stepped in, closing the door behind him. The click echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The living room was dim. No furniture except for the TV and an armchair facing it. Dust lined every surface like snowfall. The air carried a faint electrical buzz, a whisper of static growing louder as he neared the screen. Then he saw it. The image in the static, not clear at first, just shapes, then a face, his face. Mouth open, eyes wide, it flickered, then melted, replaced by Sarah's silhouette standing in a hallway that pulsed with firelight. Then another flicker, a flash of him turning away, reaching for the door, lips mouthing something he didn't want to see. The screen wasn't showing the past. It was showing his memory of it, his worst memory. Each frame crawled into view, a slideshow of the moment he failed. Over and over, different angles, different speeds. One of him running down the stairs. Another from the outside of her room, where the door handle glowed red and his fingers hovered inches away. One showed her shadow moving behind the glass, pounding. Ellis turned away. The television didn't like that. The volume spiked. Static turned violent, grinding through the air like a scream being torn in half. He stumbled back, but the room changed. Walls dropped, and he was inside a recording studio. Glass panels lined the walls. Red AR lights blinked. A microphone hung in front of him. Behind the glass, people sat in silence. Shapes more than people, blurred at the edges like dreams forgotten on waking. A voice crackled in his ear. His own. Tell them the story again. Ellis sat. He didn't want to. He was done. He finished the notebook. He bled on the page. He remembered the door, the fire, the scream. What more could the house want? The microphone came alive. Start with the part you left out. What part? No one answered. But then the screen above the console turned on. It showed her room. After the fire, the walls blackened. Toys melted to the floor. The window glass spider, webbed and warped. And in the middle of it, a charred outline on the ground. A small handprint. Burned into the wall beside the bed. Ellis leaned forward, breath frozen in his throat. He never went back in that room after the fire. The investigators did. The fire marshal. but he didn't want to see what he'd left behind. He told himself there was nothing to gain from it. But the house disagreed. A new image replaced the burned room. A memory, clearer than it should have been. Sarah sitting in her bed, just an hour before everything fell apart, drawing. The page half finished, the crayons scattered. He remembered walking past her room and saying, "Lights out in 10." He remembered not going back to check if she actually turned them off. He remembered the smell of burnt plastic and the sickening moment the power went out. But now, he remembered why. A cord behind her bed. Frayed. She'd asked him to fix it. Twice. "Daddy, the plug's making a buzzing sound." He'd brushed it off. Said it was fine. Said he'd look at it later. He never did. The fire didn't start because of the storm outside. It started because he didn't listen. That was the part he left out. The part that made it more than hesitation. It made it negligence. The studio went dark. And then, a single spotlight appeared. It lit the chair across from him, where she sat. Not burned. Not broken. Just Sarah. Older now. 12, 13. Frozen in the age she never reached. She looked at him. No malice in her eyes. No vengeance. Just quiet, waiting sadness. "You never told anyone that part," she said. "I thought I didn't remember." "No, you just didn't want to." He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. She leaned forward. "Do you think if you'd told the truth from the beginning, they would have hated you?" He didn't answer. "You thought they'd stop loving you?" He looked down. She stood, walked to him. Her hand touched his shoulder. Warm. "You don't tell the truth because it's safe," she said. "You tell it because it's real. That's how I get to live again." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry. I know." The studio vanished. He was outside again, back on the road. But now there was a figure ahead, waiting at a crossroads. A man in a long coat, face obscured. The same one from the hallway, from the fire, from the mirror. Ellis approached. The man said nothing, just extended a hand. In it a new page. Blank, a pen beside it. Ellis understood. The house had one final test. He took the page. Wrote, "I failed her." Then added, "But I will never forget her again." The man nodded and vanished. The road ahead lit in soft morning gold. The shadows no longer reached for him. The wind no longer whispered lies. And for the first time in 10 years, Ellis Grady walked forward without carrying the fire on his back. It lived in him now, not to consume, but to guide, because stories don't end in screams or silence. They end in the space between, where the truth waits, patient, burning, alive. The road had changed again. No more cracked pavement or ash-colored fog clinging to the shoulders. No twisted signs or impossible paths bending in upon themselves. Now the road was clean, precise. Newly paved, framed by black iron street lamps that gave off a cold, humming glow. Trees stood on either side like they'd been planted for ceremony, equidistant, symmetrical, eerily perfect. There was no wind. No sound but Ellis's footsteps. He wasn't sure when the air had grown cold again, or when the daylight had vanished entirely, but night had returned, and this time it didn't bring darkness. It brought reflection. Somewhere far ahead, a structure loomed, low, wide, and unfamiliar. It wasn't the house. It wasn't anything he'd seen before, but the moment he laid eyes on it, his stomach turned. Not from fear, from certainty. This was the end of the road, and something inside was waiting. The building resembled an old library, squat and fortress, like built of deep gray stone that seemed to drink light instead of reflect it. No signs marked its entrance. No windows adorned its surface, except for one, directly above the double doors, round like a watchful eye. Behind the thick glass, a dim blue light flickered, soft and rhythmic, like a heartbeat slowed to a crawl. Ellis approached, the soles of his shoes echoing against the steps. His fingers curled around the door's iron handles. Cold, unforgiving, he pulled. The doors opened with a groan that seemed to stretch longer than the room they revealed. Inside, the walls were lined with mirrors. Floor to ceiling, hundreds of them. All identical in size, perfectly rectangular, spaced with obsessive precision. None reflected him. He stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by glass, and saw everything but himself. Each mirror played moments from his past. Not the grand tragedies, not the fire, not the courtroom. The small things. Moments so mundane he had forgotten them. One mirror showed him ignoring Sarah as she tugged on his sleeve, desperate to show him a picture she'd drawn. Another showed her standing in the rain after school, her jacket forgotten, waiting because he'd lost track of time writing in a coffee shop. Another, he looked away quickly, showed her hugging him only for him to freeze. Too caught in his thoughts to return the embrace. They weren't sins in isolation. But together, they told a story, one of disconnection, of choices made in quiet moments that told a child she wasn't always seen. The mirrors didn't judge. They simply showed. That was what made them unbearable. He moved through the room slowly, unsure what he was supposed to find, until the mirrors changed. One by one, the scenes vanished. The glass darkened, until only a single mirror remained illuminated. At the far end of the room, this one didn't show a moment. It showed a room. His old study, the one where he'd written the first words of The Hollow Girl. The mirror rippled, and then the glass fell away. It became a doorway. Ellis stepped through. He was back in the study, exactly as it had been. The half-finished manuscript on the desk, the coffee mug with the chipped rim, the photograph of Sarah turned face down under a pile of notebooks, and him, sitting at the desk, typing. He watched himself write the words he had once believed were healing. Grief isn't the absence of something, it's the echo of what was too big to hold. The version of him in the chair paused, reread it, then smiled faintly. Satisfied, Ellis hated that smile now, because it hadn't been earned. The room twisted. The desk began to shift, stretching backward. The window above it expanded. The glass blurred, and through it, he saw the house again. Not the peaceful one, the burning one. He walked to the window, pressed his hand to the cold pane. And as he did, the image moved. For the first time, the window responded. He wasn't looking into the past. He was inside it. The house stood below, flames licking its edges. But this time, there was no child screaming behind the upstairs window. No horror. Just the house. Still. Waiting. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, but now it had changed. His face no longer hollow, no longer haunted. Just tired. But clear. The window cracked. Not a shatter. A thin, perfect fracture across the surface, like a fault line splitting open. And then a voice behind him. Do you know what happens to stories when they're told, right? Ellis turned. It was her. Not Sarah as a ghost, not as a memory, just Sarah, 12 years old, alive, real, and standing in his study like she'd never left. No, he whispered. She smiled gently. They stopped trying to be something else. He stepped forward, afraid to touch her, afraid she might disappear. But she didn't. I thought I had to suffer to keep you alive, he said, to remember you. No, she replied, you just had to see me. Tears rose, not the violent kind. The slow, quiet kind that blur the edges of the world. I miss you. I know. They stood there. And through the window, the house began to dissolve. Not collapse, not burn, dissolve. Its walls turned to wind, its door to dust, its screams to silence. It was done, its work complete. Ellis turned to Sarah. What now? She looked past him. To the desk, to the manuscript. You finish what you started, but this time, tell them everything. He nodded. No words left. She stepped back into the light and vanished. He stood alone. In the study, not in memory, in reality. Because this wasn't the house anymore. This was his home. Returned to him. The desk was still there, the manuscript half written. The title scratched out. He picked up the pen. Not to write about guilt, not to chronicle pain, but to say the one thing he never allowed himself to believe he deserved to say. That she was loved, that she mattered, that she was never supposed to be forgotten. The first sentence he wrote was simple. My daughter's name was Sarah, and she loved the stars. The pen moved on its own after that. Not magically, just freely. The story poured out, not perfect, not polished, but honest. And when he reached the final page, the study was silent, the kind of silence he could live inside. He stood, opened the window. Outside, dawn had come, and in the sky above the trees, a single star still lingered. Faint, but present, he smiled. Because some stories don't end, they echo, not to haunt, but to remind. He closed the window and began again. Ellis had always believed stories came in waves, rising, crashing, then pulling back into stillness. But the one he now lived, the one that had burned through the walls of his past and threaded itself through every quiet breath he took, did not recede. It didn't end, not even after he wrote the truth and watched the house vanish into light. Something remained. Something hollowed out the silence. He felt it in his bones as he sat at the desk again, his hand resting on the manuscript that now carried her name in bold across the first page. The girl who watched the sky. He'd written the final sentence days ago, or what he thought was the final sentence. He remembered pressing the period, exhaling as though he'd been holding his breath for 10 years, then closing the notebook and letting the quiet settle around him. But since then, a presence had returned. No flames, no screams, just an absence of peace, and the knowing sense that something had been left unfinished. Not in the story, but in himself. The manuscript didn't feel complete. Not yet. It was truthful, yes. It didn't hide from what happened, nor did it shield him from the weight of his own cowardice. It honored Sarah. It told her story with the voice she deserved. But underneath the sentences, between the paragraphs, something in the ink had grown restless. And that night, the air changed again. He felt it just after sunset. The temperature in the house dropped, not from any open window or draft, but from the sudden grip of stillness that stretched tight across every wall. The clock above the mantel stopped ticking. The shadows no longer followed the laws of the lamps that cast them. And when he looked into the hallway, the floor seemed longer than it should be. Ellis stood, hand sliding over the notebook once more, as if to silently reassure her. Then he moved into the hall. The walls were familiar, but the angles were not. There were no corners, where there should have been sharp edges, places where ceiling met wall, where wall met floor. There were only curves, seamless bends of architecture that looked like they had been erased rather than built. The hallway looped into itself, spiraling inward in impossible ways, and at the end of it, a door, gray, ordinary, but humming with something alive. Ellis approached slowly, every step accompanied by the echo of a heartbeat that wasn't his. The walls seemed to breathe. His own reflection rippled in them, though no mirrors lined the corridor. Just plaster that moved like skin beneath sweat. He reached the door and placed his hand against it. It didn't open. It inhaled. Then a whisper, so soft it sounded like memory being spoken. "You wrote the truth. But you haven't accepted it." Ellis swallowed. "Who's there?" No response. Just a sudden click, and the door swung open, not by force, but by consent. Inside was a room unlike any he had seen, even in the house's most broken form. It had no corners. Every wall curved. The ceiling bowed like a dome. The floor dipped gently at the center like a hollowed stage. It was a room designed to hold sound and send it nowhere. A trap for voices, for memories, for guilt. And in the center stood a single chair, facing a mirror. But this time the mirror did not reflect him. It reflected her. Sarah. Not the memory of her. Not the child of drawings and ghostly whispers. But her. Alive, breathing, sitting in the same curved chair, looking into her own mirror. And in her eyes, not fear, expectation. Ellis stepped into the room. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the door behind him vanished. The hum in the walls deepened, and the air pressed in like a closing fist. He approached the chair across from hers. Sat. They were separated only by glass now. The reflection moved when she did. But it wasn't a trick. It wasn't copying. She looked up, spoke. "You left me. Her voice was not angry. It was true. I know, Ellis said. She didn't blink. Why? He had answered that question 1,000 times in his head. Told it to mirrors, to notebooks, to therapists who stared at him with polite pity and not enough questions. But now, with her eyes watching, all the rehearsed words died in his throat. I thought I could save myself, he said. And I was wrong. Sarah nodded once. You said you'd come right back. I told myself I would. You didn't. No. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full. Full of all the years in between. The birthdays missed. The nights he stared at ceilings instead of stars. The slow fade of her voice in his mind, until all that remained was the memory of her not being there. Why did you write it? She asked. The book, the lie. He looked down. Because if I could turn you into fiction, I didn't have to face the fact that you were real. She tilted her head. So I became your metaphor. Yes. Not your daughter. Tears rose, not because he was ashamed, but because he finally understood. I wanted to bury what I did, he said. But instead I buried you. Her eyes didn't soften, but her voice did. Do you love me? Yes. Even after all of it. I never stopped. She looked into the mirror, and the image shifted. Suddenly, the mirror showed his face, but not the one he wore now. It showed the man he had been. The coward, the writer, the liar, and then, like smoke, that image burned away. Sarah stood, walked to the glass, and placed her hand on it. Ellis mirrored her. Palm to palm. There was no warmth, but there was weight. You can't fix the past, she said, but you can carry it. I will. Promise. He nodded. The mirror cracked, not in anger, not from force, but like a tear. A break that released something held too long. The wall behind Sarah dissolved, and light poured through. Real light, not the cruel firelight of memory or the spotlight of interrogation, just morning. Just the sky. She turned to it, smiled, and walked into it. The room began to fade. The chair vanished. The walls curved inward until all that remained was the notebook on his desk. Open. Waiting. Ellis sat again. Picked up his pen. And wrote, There was a time when I thought silence could protect me. That if I didn't speak it, it wouldn't be real. But grief doesn't live in silence. It lives in what we carry, and we don't carry it alone. The manuscript was done. Truly done. Not just finished. Complete. Because now it wasn't about what he had lost. It was about what he had found. The strength to remember, the courage to speak, the love that remained. He stood, closed the notebook, and behind him the house exhaled one final time. Not a scream, not a cry, a breath, a release. And the door opened, this time into the world. Real, unburned, unbroken. And as he stepped through it, Sarah's voice followed, Keep going, Daddy. And he did. There was no turning back anymore. Not in the literal sense. The house behind him had vanished, swallowed whole by the morning light. But in the deeper, more permanent way, the kind that rewrites the very structure of your memory. Ellis Grady had walked through fire, spoken with ghosts, stood before mirrors that refused to lie, and told the story he was most afraid to admit belonged to him. The manuscript was done. The truth had been told. Yet there was something in his chest that still tightened, a pressure just beneath the breastbone that reminded him endings are not clean. They're not moments, they're decisions. He found himself walking again, but not through a town or road this time. This place had no landscape, no trees, no wind. It was all hallway, endless, white, featureless hallway lit from nowhere, turning in soft, almost elegant bends, as though it were designed to resemble the inside of a thought. The air smelled faintly of dust and wood polish. Somewhere in the distance, a clock ticked, not with urgency, but with patience. He didn't panic. That part of him was gone now. He followed the curve. The hallway led him to a door, black, smooth, unmarked. Ellis paused. The door did not hum. It didn't breathe. It didn't pulse like the others had. This one was quiet. Still. That was what made it feel the most dangerous. He touched the handle. Cold. He opened it. Inside, there was no room. There was only a staircase, It rose into darkness, spiraling like the inside of a shell, steps carved from stone as smooth as ice. There were no railings, no visible support, just a path upward that defied architecture and whispered without sound. He took the first step, the second, and with each rise the world changed. There were no walls here, no ceiling, only glimpses. The staircase twisted through moments, like walking upward through memories made solid. Every few steps, he caught one in the periphery, Sarah riding a bike without training wheels for the first time, falling and laughing with blood on her knee. Sarah drawing stars on the fogged window of his car, singing to herself. Sarah asleep in the back seat, her stuffed rabbit clutched tight in her arms. None of these were hauntings. They were gifts, and they were only visible if he kept climbing. He didn't stop. Not even when his legs began to ache. Not even when the air grew thin and sharp. Not even when a voice echoed softly above him, the voice that had guided him, mocked him, challenged him all throughout this journey. His own voice, reading from the hollow girl. There is a kind of silence worse than death. It's the silence of being forgotten. Ellis grimaced. He hated those words now. Not because they were untrue, but because he'd weaponized them. Turned them into a shield to protect himself from accountability. Readers had praised them, underlined them, printed them on bookmarks. But they were born from a lie. He kept climbing. Another memory flickered beside him. His mother, frail in a hospital bed, squeezing his hand with the last of her strength, whispering, "You can't outrun what you've buried." He'd buried her too, just like Sarah. Not physically, but emotionally. He turned pain into paragraphs. He turned loss into metaphors, and then he wondered why he never felt whole. The staircase narrowed. The steps grew smaller, the memories more specific. Sarah's voice at the top of a slide, "Watch me, Daddy!" His voice from the grass below, "I'm watching, sweetheart." But he hadn't been. He'd been looking at his phone. The memory turned gray, and the step beneath him cracked. He caught himself on the next one, breath ragged. This staircase was not just ascent, it was confession. With each step, another truth rose to meet him. Not the big, world-ending truths, the quiet ones. The ones that accumulate unnoticed. How he told himself he was too tired to read her a second bedtime story. How he pretended not to hear her crying through the walls some nights. How he told her everything was okay, even when it wasn't. And worst of all, how he convinced himself those moments didn't matter. The staircase curved tighter, and ahead, just visible, was the top. A landing bathed in soft, warm light. He reached it with trembling legs and burning lungs, and found a room. Simple, round, wooden, windows lined the walls, but the view showed no outside world, only reflections of him. Every version, the father, the writer, the coward, the survivor, all watching, and in the center a desk with a single page, blank. A pen rested beside it. He approached, sat, and waited. No voice told him what to do. No ghost appeared. No door opened. This was the final test. And it wasn't about writing Sarah's story. It was about writing his own. Not the version he told publishers. Not the one shaped by interviews and fan letters. The real one. He picked up the pen and wrote, "I failed her." The ink was black, heavy, but she forgave me. His hands trembled, not because I deserved it, but because she refused to let me carry the weight alone. He paused. The reflections in the windows leaned forward, watching. He continued, "I told the world she didn't exist, because I couldn't bear the world knowing she had. But the truth isn't something we protect. It's something we release." The page darkened with each word. Sarah was brave. She was kind. She saw beauty in things I never noticed. And I spent 10 years turning her into a metaphor when she should have been a memory. He stopped. Not because he was finished, but because the words were. The page began to glow, not brightly, softly, like starlight through fog. The pen dissolved in his hand. The page lifted from the desk and floated upward into the air and vanished. The windows dimmed. The reflections bowed, one by one. And then the door appeared, across the room, white.
Plain waiting, Ellis stood.
Walked to it, and opened it. He was back in his house. The real house. Not the haunted one. Not the broken one. But the quiet, lived-in place where the walls didn't whisper and the floors didn't bleed memory. And on the kitchen table, a letter. He opened it. No return address. No stamp. Just a small note inside, written in a child's handwriting. You passed. Ellis smiled. And for the first time in a decade, it didn't hurt. He sat. Poured himself a cup of coffee, and stared out the window. There were no ghosts here. No monsters. Just the wind, and the sound of the world beginning again. Tomorrow, he'd start something new. Not fiction. Not fantasy. Just truth. And this time, he wouldn't write it alone. Because some stories aren't finished when you close the book. They're finished when you start living them. The town looked the same, and yet Ellis knew it wasn't. Not anymore. The colors were familiar. Faded bricks, copper gutters. The soft green of moss creeping between cobblestones. But there was something beneath the surface, something different. It wasn't the layout of the streets or the shape of the clouds overhead. It was in the silence. In how the silence now felt patient. Like the town wasn't holding its breath anymore, but waiting for something real. Ellis had returned by no map. There had been no road sign welcoming him back, no directions to follow. He had walked out of his home, the place that once stood on top of grief like a throne built on ashes. And with every step, the world had softened until the streets he thought he'd never see again unfolded around him like they were always meant to be found. No fog, no trick of the house this time. No illusion. The town was here, real, awake, and it had something left to show him. The sun sat low in the sky, casting long shadows through narrow alleyways. Birds circled above, their cries quiet, almost reverent. He passed the bookstore, its windows now clean. The sign above finally legible. Daughters and Dust. A name he didn't remember seeing before. But it made something in his chest catch. He almost stepped inside. Almost. But the feeling that tugged at him wasn't pulling him there. It came from somewhere deeper. Beyond the storefronts and lampposts, beyond the repaired sidewalks and sleeping bicycles. It called from a part of the town he hadn't walked since he was young. Before the house, before Sarah, before grief had wrapped its hands around his throat and tightened until his memories warped. He followed it. The street narrowed. Storefronts gave way to wooden fences, hand-painted signs, chalk drawings half, erased by rain. The smell of wood smoke lingered in the air, subtle but comforting. Not like the fire that had torn Sarah away. This was fire as it was meant to be. Controlled, warm, distant. Then he saw it. The playground. Old. Rusted exactly as he remembered it. The yellow slide that burned your skin in summer. The swing set with one missing chain. The merry-go round that spun too fast when pushed hard enough and left kids sprawled in the grass laughing, breathless, bruised. He stepped onto the sand, and the air changed. Not heavy. Not haunted, just alert. Something was listening. He walked to the center of the playground. The merry-go round groaned as the wind nudged it slowly. The chains on the swings clinked. And the air, thick with the scent of memory, curled around him like a question waiting to be answered. Then he saw her. Sarah. Not the girl from before. Not a ghost. Not a reflection. Just her. Sitting on the highest step of the slide, looking at the sky, her legs dangling, one sock pulled higher than the other. His breath caught. Sarah. She looked down. Smiled. Hey, Daddy. The words shattered something in him. Not because they hurt, but because they didn't. They filled him. He walked slowly to the slide, not wanting to break whatever fragile boundary kept this moment from slipping into illusion. You're here, he whispered. She nodded. I was always here. He sat at the bottom step, looking up at her like she was the sun, and he was finally brave enough to stop shielding his eyes. Is this real? Sarah tilted her head. Does it feel like a lie? He shook his head. No. Then it's real enough. They sat in silence for a while. The kind of silence Ellis never thought he'd share with her again. The good kind. The kind filled with breath and warmth, with understanding that didn't need words to exist. Then she asked, "Do you remember the story about the turtle and the sky?" He blinked. "That dumb thing I made up in the car. When you asked where stars go during the day," she laughed. "You said they hide inside turtle shells. I thought you'd forgotten that." "I didn't forget anything." Her voice softened. "Not even you." Ellis looked down at his hands. "I don't deserve this." "I don't deserve you." "I know," she said. "Not cruel, just honest. But I also know you tried, even when you didn't know how, even when it hurt more to look than to forget." He looked up at her again. "I wish I could go back, just for a second, to fix the, you can't." And she was right. He couldn't. The fire happened. He left. She died. That was the truth. No ghost, no walk through a burning house. No final confrontation would ever undo that. It wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about walking through it with his eyes open. "I'm scared," he said. "Of what? That I'll forget you again." "You won't," he swallowed. "Because I finally told your story." She shook her head. "No. Because you finally stopped pretending it wasn't yours too." Tears came then, uninvited, slow, hot. And she didn't run from them. She climbed down the steps, stood beside him, took his hand, and in her palm was a folded piece of paper. He opened it, a drawing, him, her, and a turtle. Above them stars. Below fire. They stood between the two, alive. "You drew this." "I finished it," she said. "You started it a long time ago." "In the car. You just didn't know you were drawing." Ellis folded the paper carefully, slipped it into his coat. The sun dipped lower. Shadows stretched across the playground. Sarah looked toward the edge of the trees, where the path curved back toward town. "You have to go now," he nodded. "Will I see you again?" She smiled. "You'll hear me." And then she turned, walked away, not into light, not into shadow, just away. And the moment she disappeared, the air let go of its question. The wind returned. The chain stopped clinking, and Ellis stood alone. He didn't panic. He didn't chase. He just turned and walked back to town, the playground behind him, the drawing in his pocket, and the weight in his chest finally shifting into something he could carry. Not just grief, but love. Because echoes only exist when something real is spoken, and now he had spoken it, loud enough for the town to hear, for the house to dissolve, for Sarah to sleep without fear, and for himself to begin. The path back into town was quiet, but not in the same way it used to be. The air no longer held that sharp tension that clung to his skin like a warning. The sky, though clouded, no longer pressed down on him. And the silence, once pregnant with threat, had changed. Now it hummed like something listening not to punish, but to understand. As Ellis moved past the playground, the drawing of him and Sarah folded safely in his pocket, he felt the rhythm of this new silence. Not hollow, not haunted. It pulsed low and steady, like a heartbeat under floorboards. He followed the winding sidewalk until it led him back to the bookstore he had passed earlier. Daughters and Dust. The sign no longer flickered. The glass no longer smeared with age. In fact, the storefront looked freshly cleaned, as if someone had scrubbed it while he was gone. A bell above the door gave a crisp, singular ring as he stepped inside. The air hit him like memory paper, ink, cedar. The scent of stories, both told and waiting. There was no one behind the counter. No customers. Just a narrow path between tall shelves and a soft, steady light that came from deeper within. He knew he wasn't here to browse. The town hadn't called him back to skim pages or revisit old novels. It wanted something else from him. Or perhaps it had something to give. He followed the path past shelves filled with blank spines. Dozens, maybe hundreds. No titles, no authors, no colors. Just row after row of books that looked as though they had forgotten their own contents. Then the shelves ended, and he found himself in front of a door. Thin, wooden, painted white, no handle. Just a single sentence carved into the wood. Not all voices are loud. Ellis stared at the words. He remembered Sarah's voice, soft, uncertain, too easily talked over, and his own voice, once broadcasted through interviews, podcasts, and stages full of eloquence, carefully packaged sadness. The kind of voice that convinced people he understood grief, when really, he only understood how to explain it. He pushed on the door. It gave way without resistance. Inside, the room was round, like the one in the staircase tower. But this one was darker, smaller, and filled with shelves that hugged the walls like ribs. Each shelf held something strange. Not books, not scrolls, not any conventional format of storytelling. They held objects: a hairbrush, a cracked toy phone, a rusted lunchbox, a single shoelace, a burned music box. Each item sat on a velvet pedestal. Beneath each one, a small plaque. No names, just single words. Forgiven, missed, blamed, left. Ellis walked slowly between the objects. Each one pulsed with something that wasn't quite sound. The music box, though cracked and blackened, hummed faintly with a song he couldn't place, but somehow remembered. The lunchbox radiated warmth, like sun-soaked plastic. The toy phone's receiver twitched once as he passed it, almost reaching for him. He stopped in front of an item that hadn't drawn his eye, but his breath. A sock, child-sized, pink with a faded cartoon cat on the ankle. He dropped to one knee without thinking. The plaque beneath it read unspoken. And then he heard it, not out loud, inside, a whisper, not Sarah's. His, saying, "We'll talk about it tomorrow." He remembered now. That night, he'd picked her up from school late. She'd been quiet in the car. Not sad, not angry, just quiet. She'd taken her shoes off at the door, wandered to her room, and he'd noticed the sock, only one. She hadn't said where the other went. He didn't ask, didn't press. He'd meant to ask her at bedtime. But she'd fallen asleep before he came in. And then the fire. He stared at the sock for a long time. The silence around him sharpened. Not cruel, but full of every word not said. Every question not asked. Every small kindness skipped because he was tired or distracted or writing. He stood. The air shifted. And the walls behind the shelves slid open, like a puzzle he hadn't realized he'd triggered, revealing another door. This one was glass. Behind it, a staircase descending into black. Etched into the door, every echo begins with silence. He opened it. The stairs groaned under his weight. The walls here were stone. Wet, cold. As he moved downward, the air thinned. The light above vanished, replaced by a faint blue glow pulsing from the stone itself. It wasn't comforting, but it wasn't hostile. At the bottom, the passage opened into a cavernous room. A dome, far larger than should have existed beneath the town. Hundreds of chairs filled the space, each facing a central stage, but the chairs were not empty. Each held a person. Some real, some imagined, some barely formed. They were made of memory, and every one of them had his face. Ellis stared at them, dizzy. Versions of himself, all ages, all timelines, all decisions. One wore a suit, smiling as he gave an award acceptance speech. One sat crumpled in a hoodie, chain smoking beside a hospital bed. One bled from the hands, wrists wrapped in bandages, typing with broken fingers. And one sat at the edge, child-sized, knees pulled to chest, eyes wide with shame. The Ellis who didn't know yet. They all turned to him. As one, they spoke. Why did you wait? He couldn't answer. Because there was no single answer. There were 1,000, and none of them were good enough. The stage in the center flickered. A chair appeared. He moved toward it. Sat. A microphone rose from the floor. Simple black. Coe leaned in, and finally said it. I waited because I was afraid that the story of what I did would become who I was. Silence. Then the chairs nodded, one by one, a slow wave of understanding. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. The child, Ellis, stood, walked to the stage, in his hand a book, blank cover. He offered it. Ellis took it. The child said, "You've written her story. Now write yours." The room began to dissolve, not collapse, just fade. like fog lifting. Ellis stood on a hill now, the town far below, lights on in every home, windows open, laughter in the distance, life moving forward. And in his hand, the blank book. It was lighter than any manuscript he'd held before, because this one didn't carry guilt. It carried possibility. He opened to the first page, wrote, "This is not a story of redemption. It is a story of return. Not to the person I was, but to the person I was always meant to be. The one who listens. The one who stays." He closed the book, put it in his coat, and walked down the hill, toward the town, not as a man running from the past, not as a ghost carrying ashes, but as someone ready to live again, to speak without hiding, to remember without breaking, because now he knew. The story never ends when the book closes. It ends when the silence is filled with truth. The wind had changed again. Ellis noticed it before he reached the base of the hill. It wasn't colder or louder. It was heavier, thick with meaning, like a held breath about to be released. The kind of wind that carried more than air. The kind that brought memories tucked in the folds of its silence. He stepped into the street and felt it slide over his skin, a hush crawling across his neck, curling under his collar like a whisper. The town was still and lit. Every house had a light on, but no people moved behind the windows. No doors opened. No voices called out. The warmth was there, but it was vacant. As if the town itself was watching him now, expectant. It didn't feel malicious, just unresolved. Like a question hanging in the dark, waiting for him to speak first. He turned onto a narrow road lined with trees bent at unnatural angles. They leaned toward the path, their branches not gnarled but reaching, like spectators too curious to keep still. The wind carried a scent he hadn't smelled since childhood: dry grass, rust, and the faint sting of matchstick sulfur. It was leading him somewhere. At the end of the road stood a house he didn't recognize. It wasn't the burning house. It wasn't his home. This was something else, older, less defined, built from brick too dark to be red, too cold to be brown. The roof slanted slightly off-center. The windows were too tall. No curtains. No light. Just the reflective shine of glass that showed the world, but never what was within. A sign hung above the crooked door. The words painted in long, uneven strokes, "The House of Hollow Names." His hands clenched before he realized they had. The drawing Sarah gave him was still folded in his coat. He touched it for comfort, then stepped forward. The door creaked open before he reached it. Ellis stepped into the dark. The room inside was enormous, far too big for the house's frame. A ceiling that seemed to breathe with the rise and fall of unseen air. No furniture, no fireplace, no pictures. Just a massive black wall stretching from floor to ceiling, carved from polished obsidian. Names covered it, thousands of them, each carved with agonizing precision. Every letter sharp, clean, deep enough to hold shadow, and none of them familiar. He stepped closer. The names glowed faintly as he neared, first one, then another. Not with light, but with presence, as if the attention he gave them made them visible, made them real. He ran his fingers across one Lillian C. Rourke. A flash of sound filled his head. A scream cut short. A train platform. The smell of smoke and cheap perfume. Then silence again. He staggered back, gasping. This wall wasn't memorial. It was memory. Not his, others, the forgotten, the misunderstood, the unnamed griefs carried by strangers too quiet to be heard. This was a library of loss. He turned, about to leave, and saw his own name begin to appear on the far side of the wall. Slowly, carved by invisible hands, Ellis Grady beneath it another line. Father, coward, witness. He wanted to look away, but then something changed. Another name began to burn beneath his. Small letters, careful ones. Sarah Grady. No labels followed it, no cruel adjectives, just her name. But it glowed brighter than all the others. He stepped forward. The wall rippled, melted, and turned into a doorway. He didn't hesitate. Inside, the world changed again. He stood in a long corridor lined with doors, each one painted a different color. each one humming softly, like they each held a different note of a broken song. The ceiling stretched endlessly above. The walls pulsed, slow and steady. This was not architecture. It was memory, organized. He walked past the doors slowly, reading the names stenciled on each one. Regret, guilt, shame, hope. He stopped at the last one. It had no name, just a symbol. A circle broken at the top. He pushed it open. Inside, a single room. Walls lined with mirrors again. But these didn't show him. They showed her. Sarah, again and again, in moments too small to remember. Her opening a juice box, tying a shoe, laughing at a bird outside the car window. Each image only a second long, but each one was his. Moments he had lived and forgotten, until now. In the center of the room, a table. On it, a box, wooden, carved, unlocked. Inside it, one object. A photograph, not of Sarah, of him, holding her, smiling, both of them laughing. It was real. He remembered the moment, the smell of her hair, the way she'd reached for his nose and missed. A moment unremarkable until it was gone. He picked up the photograph. The mirrors went dark. A voice spoke behind him. "You've finally seen her." He turned. A woman stood there, older, tired, eyes kind. Not Sarah, but familiar. "You knew her?" he asked. The woman shook her head. "I was her." Ellis didn't understand. She stepped closer. "I was every child left behind, every voice quieted by a louder grief, every memory rewritten by someone too afraid to remember what really happened." He swallowed. "What happens now? You speak the name." "Sarah? No. Yours." He hesitated, then said it. "My name is Ellis Grady, and I am the man who left, the man who ran, the man who returned." The woman nodded. The photograph glowed, and everything around him, walls, mirrors, silence, began to lift like dust in sunlight. And then, darkness, total, weightless. And a voice, "This is how you begin again." Darkness held him, not in the way fear might, but like a mother's arms around a child who'd finally cried enough. It was thick, but not choking. Quiet, but not void. There was something here, unseen yet undeniably present. Ellis floated in it, not with his body, but with everything left of him. When memory peeled away muscle and story and title, he did not see the room dissolve, didn't watch the walls fade or the woman disappear. He had simply spoken his name, truly, wholly, for the first time since Sarah died, and the world had gone silent. Not in punishment, in acknowledgement. There was nothing beneath his feet, yet he did not fall. There was no light, yet he saw. Saw not with eyes, but with the part of himself that had once, long ago, looked up at his daughter and listened instead of answering. And in that space, that total, impossible quiet, something began to happen. It started as a pulse, not a heartbeat, a turning of pages. He couldn't hear it so much as feel it, soft, steady, like parchment brushing air. Then warmth bloomed, a soft glow, as though a candle had been lit in the distance, beyond a veil of ink. The light gathered, shaped itself, and formed a desk beneath him, rising from nothing, ancient and worn. The wood bore the marks of countless hands, carved initials, deep scratches from restless pens, ink stains that had bled through decades. Then the chair appeared, high-backed, leather-faded, familiar. He sat, not because he chose to, but because there was nowhere else to go. The darkness bowed back, circling the light like a reverent witness, and on the desk a book, bound in black cloth, no title, no author, no spine text, but it pulsed, with breath, with life. It was closed, but not locked. Ellis stared at it, something tightening behind his ribs. He reached out and touched the cover. It felt warm, like a palm held too long near fire. When he opened it, the pages flipped without his touch, each one humming softly as it turned. He realized something then. The book wasn't blank, it was his. Not the version he had published. Not the Hollow Girl or the hundreds of short stories that came afterward. This wasn't fiction. It was history. It was him. Each page etched with his thoughts, memories, choices. Some he remembered, others he didn't. It knew everything. It had kept everything. Then the pages stopped flipping, settled on one, a date, March 7th, the day before the fire. He didn't want to read it. But the words were already there. Scrawled not in ink, but in a deeper color, something red. Something almost living. She asked if I'd watch her draw. I said later. She asked if I'd eat dinner with her. I said I had a deadline. She asked if I'd lie beside her while she slept. I said I'd come in after I finished one more paragraph. Each line stabbed. Because they weren't dramatic, weren't cruel, weren't born from hate. They were the smallest moments, the ones that stacked up until they buried her, until they buried him. Ellis gripped the desk, breath shuddering. He turned the page. March 8th, she screamed. I heard her. I left. I told myself it was to get help, but it was to get away. He wanted to close the book. Wanted to burn it, shred it, fling it into the darkness that had birthed it. But he didn't, because on the next page a single line glowed, written not in his voice, but hers. Sarah's. I would have forgiven you even if you never came back. The light swelled. Pages turned again, racing this time, too fast to read. Years passed. Thoughts, lies, truths, moments of near redemption, followed by deeper retreat. Then, finally, the page stopped, dated today. A blank space waiting. A quill pen appeared on the desk. No fanfare, no music. Just the quiet offer of choice. Right. Not fiction, not escape, truth. Ellis took the pen and wrote, I am the father of Sarah Grady. I failed her. Not with malice, with absence. And I lived in shadow because I thought silence would keep her closed. He paused. The words shimmered. He kept writing. But I was wrong. Silence builds walls. And I chose them because I thought grief was safer than memory. The book vibrated like a heart skipping. She saved me, even in death, not by haunting me, but by waiting, by believing I could one day listen. The light grew, soft, golden warm. The darkness faded, and the book closed itself. Ellis stood. The desk dissolved, the chair folded into ash. And he was alone again. But not the kind of alone that leaves a man hollow. This was the kind of alone a person needs before becoming something else. The floor reformed beneath him. Stone at first, then tile, then carpet. A hallway took shape ahead, simple, unassuming, and at the end a door. This one was not strange. It was painted white, scuffed at the bottom, the kind of door you'd find in any house. His hand found the knob. And for the first time in years, he didn't hesitate. He turned it, opened it, and stepped through. He was home. Not a vision, not a dream. Home. Same couch, same coffee table, same photograph on the mantel. Though now, for the first time, Sarah's face was not blurred. Her smile, once smudged by memory, had returned. Ellis crossed the room, set the drawing on the table, and beside it the book. The one that had written itself as he lived it. He had no idea how it came with him. Maybe it always had. Maybe he'd just never been brave enough to open it before. Outside the window, birds began to sing. The kind of song that comes not with joy, but with the lifting of weight. The kind that says you can breathe now. Ellis sat on the couch, no pen in hand, no story to write, because for once, he wasn't running. And that was the true beginning. The sound returned slowly, like a fading melody reintroduced not with grandeur, but with gravity. Ellis sat alone on his couch, the book closed, the drawing resting beside it, and in that ordinary silence, the house around him began to speak, not with words, not with voices, but with presence, the kind you notice only after everything else stops, the hum of something deep beneath the floorboards. A rhythm he couldn't unhear now, not after everything. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't even sad. It was a reminder there were still pieces he hadn't uncovered. Still names left buried. He stood, drawn not by fear or obligation, but instinct. The kind of instinct that lives in the bones. The house was real now, solid in ways it had never been when he first returned. The air didn't twist with sorrow, but it pulsed with memory. And there was one place he hadn't looked. Not truly, not when it mattered. The basement. The door to it had always been there. Tucked beside the kitchen pantry, plain and white, easily missed, easily ignored. He had never liked that door. In the years before the fire, it had creaked even when shut. Sarah had once told him she heard voices behind it. He told her basements were just old and noisy, like the house itself. But he'd never asked what the voices said. Now, he wished he had. Ellis stood in front of the door and listened. The silence was absolute, and somehow louder than any whisper. He opened it. The stairs were wooden, steep, coated in dust and faint fingerprints, small ones, a child's. The air changed as he descended, not colder, not darker, just older. Like the house remembered him, remembered her, remembered everything that had once been ignored. The bottom step creaked beneath his foot. The basement was small, low-ceilinged. Boxes piled in corners, long forgotten holiday decorations, leaning against rusted metal shelves. But his attention wasn't on the clutter, it was on the floor. Wooden planks, unfinished, marked. He knelt, ran his hand across the grain, and then he saw them. Carvings. Dozens of them, faint and shallow, but unmistakable. Names, not just Sarah's. Other names, too many to count. Children's names, etched by unsure hands, their lines crooked and deliberate. Some had dates beside them. Others had nothing but letters. Some were already faded beyond recognition. He whispered the one closest to him. Ellie. The plank beneath his palm grew warm. The air shifted. A memory not his surge forward. A little girl in another house. A different fire. A scream too late. A hand not reached in time. And then, silence again. Ellis staggered back, breath ragged. These were not just names. They were testimonies. Memorials left by children never remembered. This wasn't his basement. Not anymore. It was a vault. A cemetery for voices that had once screamed and were never heard. He stood slowly, his knees trembling under the weight of realization. The house hadn't chosen him by accident. It hadn't haunted him to punish him. It had found him. Because he'd been one of them. He had heard the cry, and he had run, and now he was back. The warmth beneath the floor began to spread, as though the house had heard his understanding. The wood shifted, separating not violently, but like petals opening. A hole appeared. Not deep, just enough for one thing. A small black box. He reached in and pulled it out. It was smooth, heavy, cold. He opened the lid. Inside a tape recorder. Old, worn. He pressed PLY, static. Then a voice, faint, fragile. Sarah's. Daddy, I don't think you can hear me, but if you ever find this, I hope you remember my laugh, not the scream. His knees gave out. He dropped to the floor, clutching the recorder, and sobbed, loud, broken. Not from guilt, but from knowing. From finally understanding the cost of silence. Of pretending the small things didn't matter. He played the message again, and again. Each time, the voice steadier. Each time, her tone lighter. Not in fear, in forgiveness. And by the fifth time, he wasn't crying anymore. He was breathing. Truly breathing. The floor sealed itself. The warmth remained. And the names glowed faintly, like stars beneath the wood. Ellis stood, left the basement, not quickly, not triumphantly, but whole, for the first time. The book still waited on the table, its cover darker now. Not ominous, complete. He touched it, felt the pulse again. A single word appeared on the front. Not the hollow girl, not the grieving father. Just one word returned. He smiled. Not because everything was healed, but because healing had finally begun. And outside, for the first time since Sarah died, the wind sang. Morning crept into the house like it was uncertain of its welcome. Light filtered through the blinds in soft bars, sketching patterns across the living room floor. Ellis sat in the same place he had the night before, the tape recorder resting in his hands like a heartbeat made solid. He hadn't played it again. Not because he couldn't bear to, but because the words no longer needed repetition to remain with him. They had embedded themselves in his marrow. Simple and clear, I hope you remember my laugh. Not the scream. He did. More than that, he remembered her. The house no longer creaked underfoot or shuddered behind the walls. The old tension that once pulsed in every corner had gone quiet. Not gone, exactly, but settled, like dust on a bookshelf after someone stops trying to wipe it clean. It didn't need to hide anymore. It didn't need to rattle to be heard. The memories had been acknowledged, spoken, mourned. But Ellis knew there was still more. He stood, moved slowly. His muscles still carried the echo of the basement floor, the shape of the names carved into his palms. He hadn't forgotten them. Not Ellie, not the others. They whispered just beneath his skin, reminders of stories never told, griefs never acknowledged. Children who had cried out in their last moments, not for saints or salvation, but for someone to hear them. And now someone had. He walked down the hallway toward Sarah's old bedroom. The door was ajar. Not wide, just enough to let in a sliver of light, the kind that could catch a child's eye from across a hallway and invite them to peek. He hadn't opened this door in years. Not truly. He had stepped in once, months after the fire, stood in the middle of the room like a stranger, trying not to touch anything, then backed out and shut it again. Since then, it had become a mausoleum, a sacred place by default, unchanged, untouched. Now it called to him. He pushed the door open. The air inside wasn't stale, as he expected. It was warm, alive. The scent of old crayons, cotton sheets, the faint hint of lemon shampoo. Her room hadn't decayed, it had waited. The bookshelf was still full. Her drawings were still tacked to the corkboard above her tiny desk. Stars, animals, a crooked house with too many windows. Her bed was made the way she used to, in a rush blanket pulled up halfway, stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. And on the bed, something new. A single envelope, his name written on the front in red crayon. He froze. Every part of his body resisted. Even now, after everything, after the fire, the staircase, the house of hollow names, this small envelope undid him more completely than any phantom or vision. But he picked it up, opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a photograph. The photo was one he'd never seen: Sarah, sitting on the porch steps, chin propped on her fists, grinning so wide her cheeks stretched pink. Behind her was him, blurry, in mid-laugh, candid, real, no filters, no framing. The note was brief. "Hi, Daddy. If you're reading this, it means you're ready. Not ready to forget. Ready to remember. You don't have to keep everything the same anymore. You don't have to freeze time to keep me close. I'm not gone. You just stopped listening. But now, you're listening again. So it's okay to change things. You can repaint. You can laugh. You can live. I remember you. Not the scared part. Not the quiet part. The part that stayed up with me during thunderstorms and made pancakes too thick. The part that sang off, key on purpose just to make me laugh. I love that you. You don't have to be haunted. Love, Sarah." He sank onto the edge of her bed, the letter trembling in his hands. How? How had it gotten here? Was this one of the house's final gifts? One last unburied truth, finally unearthed after he'd done the work of facing everything else? Or had it always been there, and he simply couldn't see it until he was ready? He didn't know. And for once, he didn't need to know. Because the voice in the note, that was her. No doubt. No dream. He folded it gently and placed it on the pillow, beside the rabbit. Then he stood and began. He didn't clean the room in a flurry of catharsis. He didn't strip it of her. He moved slowly, deliberately. He opened the closet and found old sweaters too small to keep. He folded the ones that smelled like her and stored them in a cedar box. He chose the books she'd loved most and moved them to the living room shelf. He found an old shoebox filled with tiny plastic animals and scattered stones from the backyard and placed it under his desk. Her odd little treasures now part of his world again. The room would stay hers, but it would change, because that was what she wanted. And somewhere, deep in the bones of the house, he felt it sigh in relief. Late that night, Ellis made tea and stood by the window, watching the wind blow gently through the trees. The town was quiet, not because it was hiding, but because it was listening. And when he turned back toward the living room, he saw the book on the table again. Its cover had changed. Now the title had formed The Room That Remembered You, and beneath it, the author, Ellis Grady. He picked it up, opened it. Page 1 held no introduction, no dedication, only a single sentence: every haunted house is just a home waiting for its story to be told. He smiled and started writing again. The first draft took 3 days. Ellis barely slept, not because he was haunted, but because he wasn't. For the first time since the fire, the words didn't come out like poison. They weren't confessions soaked in guilt or stories masquerading as apologies. They were clean, whole, real. He wrote in the mornings with coffee growing cold beside him, at night with the low hum of the house surrounding him like a lullaby. And through it all, the room stayed still. The lights didn't flicker. The shadows didn't shift. Even the basement remained quiet. But that silence, it was changing. It had weight. It watched. On the 4th morning, Ellis woke to a sound. Not startling, not jarring. A soft creak, like a body settling into a chair. He opened his eyes and knew immediately it came from the wall. The one behind the headboard. At first, he thought it was a pipe. The house was old, after all, but it happened again the next night, and again. Always the same rhythm, 3 soft creaks, a pause, then silence. He started to count them, not out of fear, but curiosity. They followed no schedule, but they came. It wasn't until the 7th night that he realized it wasn't a sound he was hearing. It was a pattern, like tapping in Morse code, like someone trying to speak without a mouth. He sat up in bed, breathing steady, and placed his hand flat against the wall. The moment he did, the creak stopped. The wall grew warm, not heated by sun or pipe, but something deeper. Presence. He leaned closer. Is someone there? No response. But the warmth lingered. He left his hand there for almost an hour, unmoving. When he pulled away, something had changed. A crack had formed in the paint. A hair, thin line from ceiling to floor, so faint it would disappear in daylight. But in the dark, it glowed. Not brightly, not even visibly unless you were looking for it. But it pulsed like a breath. He didn't sleep that night. Instead, he followed the crack. It ran through the entire house, behind picture frames, beneath carpets, around door frames. It was everywhere, and when he traced it, truly followed its path, he discovered something else. It always led him back to one place. Sarah's room. But not the bed, not the bookshelf, the closet. The one she used to keep shut with a plastic pink lock, claiming the shadows don't like to be seen. Ellis stood before it, breath caught. The lock was gone now. Only a small dent where it used to hang. He opened the door. Darkness, shallow and unthreatening, greeted him. Just clothes, old shoes, a storage box filled with broken dolls, and in the back, another crack, this one wider. Just enough to press his fingertips into. He did, and something clicked. The back wall of the closet shifted, then slowly opened. Behind it was a narrow crawl space, no more than 3 feet wide. Dust floated in the air like ash, but it wasn't cold. It wasn't wrong. He crawled inside. The tunnel curved downward slightly, bending left, then right. The walls were raw wood and stone, stitched together like bones healed at odd angles. And then, light, a dim, golden glow pulsing from a chamber no larger than a pantry. Inside, one object, a phonograph. Old, pristine, out of place in every way, no dust on it, no wear. Just a needle raised, waiting. A single record sat beside it. No label, no markings. Just smooth black vinyl, perfectly round. Ellis placed it on the turntable, lowered the needle. At first, only static, then her voice. Not a ghost's whisper, not a memory. Her real voice. Sarah. Laughing. Then Daddy. He nearly dropped to his knees. I don't know if this works, but I saw the man in the attic. He said if I talked here, the house would keep it safe. That someday, you'd find it. So, I'm saying hi. She paused. A giggle. You were asleep when I recorded this. You looked funny with your mouth open, like a fish. Another pause. More serious this time. I heard the house talking again. It doesn't talk like people. It creaks and knocks, and sometimes it breathes. But it's not mean. I think it's just lonely. Like you? Silence. Then, softer sometimes, I think I'm supposed to go. But I don't want to leave you sad. So I stayed a little longer, just until you could hear me. Then the record ended. Ellis sat in the crawl space, tears spilling down his cheeks. Not from pain, not from guilt, from the sheer grace of being given something he didn't deserve. The house had kept her voice, had protected it, it had waited, not just for him to return, for him to listen. And now, he had. He carried the phonograph out carefully, placed it on the table beside the book. He didn't play it again that night. He didn't need to. Her voice was inside him now. Every breath, every step, every heartbeat moving forward, he carried her. Not as a weight, as a companion. And the crack in the wall, it pulsed once more, then sealed itself, not vanished, healed. Ellis woke to birdsong and a strange peace. Not the quiet that had once suffocated the house, but a new kind, rested, attentive, alive. The house didn't groan anymore in the morning. It didn't creak or cough or shudder. It breathed. Not in the way living things do, but like it was finally at ease. Even the air had shifted. It no longer carried that dense, sour weight he'd once mistaken for memory. It smelled like open windows, like new paper. Like someone had finally scrubbed the grief from the walls. He moved through the house slowly, deliberately, coffee in hand. Every room felt awake, like a pet that had stopped pretending to be asleep. And for the first time, he noticed something had changed in Sarah's room. Not drastically, just one detail. The painting. It was a watercolor she had made in art class. Abstract swirls of color that, if you looked at long enough, started to resemble a forest in the rain. It had always hung just above her bed, slanted slightly to the left, the frame chipped on one corner. But today, it wasn't crooked. The frame had been straightened, not by him, and the colors inside it, they moved. At first, he thought it was the lighting, a trick of the morning sun. But no, when he leaned closer, when he narrowed his eyes and let the rest of the room blur, he saw it the faintest ripple in the painted sky, as if someone, somewhere inside the paper, was breathing. He stared for a long time, waiting for it to stop, but it didn't. The forest kept shifting. Trees swayed. Raindrops formed and vanished. And just at the center, half hidden behind a swirl of blue and green, stood a figure. Slight, barely more than a blur. He blinked and it was gone. But the breath caught in his throat didn't leave. He stepped back, heart rising, slowly, deliberately. What had he just seen? Was the painting changing? Or had it always been that way, and he simply never noticed? That question didn't have time to settle, because then the house sighed. A long, deep exhale that fluttered the curtains and made the light flicker, just once. He turned on instinct and found another painting on the wall that hadn't been there the night before. This one was unfamiliar, framed in the same chipped wood, but newer in style. Modern brushstrokes, smudged faces. A scene that might have been a family picnic, until you looked closer. The figures didn't sit on the blanket. They floated above it. Their mouths weren't smiling, they were open, and every face had his, each one. A dozen versions of Ellis, all caught mid-scream, and behind them, in the blurred tree line, her, not Sarah, the woman from the House of Hollow Names, standing, watching, waiting. He staggered back, nearly dropping his cup. The painting didn't change again, but it didn't need to. The message was clear. This wasn't over. The house wasn't haunted anymore, but it remembered, and now it wanted him to remember something else. He turned to leave the room, but the door had closed behind him. Slowly, soundlessly, not locked, just shut. He reached for the handle. It turned, but the door wouldn't open, not forward, not backward. It stayed still, as if the wood had forgotten how to swing. And then, from behind him, a sound. A child's voice. Soft. Confused. Daddy. He turned, and saw the painting change in real time. The figure that had been in the blurred forest, the little girl, was now walking toward the front of the canvas. Closer with every breath. Her face was still vague, but the shape, the outline, it was hers. Sarah, no longer just a voice in a tape recorder, not just a memory. Now a presence on canvas. Trying to step through, he fell to his knees. This wasn't grief replaying itself. This wasn't guilt. This was invitation. She wanted him to come with her, but not leave. Follow. He pressed his palm against the canvas. It was warm, soft. The surface rippled, like water disturbed by wind, and he knew, some part of him knew. There was something inside the house, something beneath everything else he'd uncovered. A final room, a hidden space, where her memory wasn't just stored, it was alive. He ran. The door opened this time. The hallway felt longer than before. The stairs creaked in unfamiliar patterns. The front door stood wide, showing a yard that shimmered with a different kind of light. Not sunlight. Not moonlight. Memory light. The same gold that filled the chamber where he'd found the phonograph. The house was shifting again. Not violently. Not to trap. To guide. He followed the light. It led him to the attic. He hadn't been up there since before. It had been sealed off. Stairs too narrow. Ceiling too low. But now it welcomed him. He climbed. Each step pulsed. The hatch opened without effort, and inside, nothing. Just dust, and one portrait. Covered in black cloth, he approached. Hands shaking, pulled the cloth, and saw himself, holding her, both of them smiling. But this time, the portrait blinked. He blinked. It blinked back. Then the smile on the painted Sarah widened. And she whispered from the canvas, "Now you're ready." Ready for what? The attic disappeared. The floor beneath him fell away, and he was falling, not downward, inward. Into the memory. Into the painting. And the last thing he saw before the world shifted. A second name appearing beneath his in the corner of the frame, Sarah Grady. Co-author. He hit the ground without hitting it. There was no pain, no impact, no sense of weight returning. Just a thud felt somewhere behind his eyes, like waking from a too real dream. The world around him rippled as though his presence disturbed the fabric of the place itself. This wasn't the attic anymore. It wasn't the painting either. He had fallen, or been pulled, into something beyond wood and canvas. Somewhere deeper. Somewhere designed to remember. The room was wide, circular, its walls forged not from brick or plaster, but from old, aged mirrors. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Each one a slightly different shape. Each one humming faintly, like a tuning fork had been struck somewhere just beyond reach. And they didn't reflect him. None of them did. As he stood in the center, turning slowly, Ellis realized the mirrors weren't showing the present at all. They were showing moments. Fleeting ones. Forgotten ones. Here, he saw Sarah at age 2, crumpled on the floor in a tantrum, red-faced and wailing. While he, younger, tired, leaned against the wall, scrolling his phone, saying nothing. In another, she was 8, holding a drawing up to him with both hands, beaming. Waiting for praise he hadn't given, because he'd been rushing out the door to meet a publisher. In the one nearest him, she was older. 10 maybe. Sitting alone at the kitchen table, a birthday cake in front of her, unlit candles melting from the heat of the afternoon sun, untouched. Ellis staggered back. The reflections didn't accuse. They didn't judge. They simply existed, each memory preserved in looping silence. A record not of horror, but of neglect's quieter cousins, distraction, absence, forgetting to look when it mattered most. And then, just as he began to understand the depth of what this room was, a new mirror lit up. Not behind him. Above. It hovered there in the ceiling, refracting its light across the entire room. This one showed him, not as he'd been, but now. Standing in this chamber of regret, face drawn, eyes raw, chest cracked open by the weight of it all, and next to him in that mirror, a hand reached out from the dark. Small. Familiar. Sarah. Not a vision. Not a ghost. Her. Not as she had been in death, but as she might be now. Older, real, whole. Her eyes met his through the glass, and she smiled. The kind of smile that said, "I've been waiting." Then her hand pressed to the inside of the mirror. Ellis lifted his own, touched it, and the glass vanished. The room didn't fade, it shattered. Every mirror burst into sound, not shards, but voices. Thousands of them, all speaking at once. Laughter, crying, questions left unanswered, goodbyes never said, names, so many names. The children from the floorboards, from the house of hollow names, from the basement and the paintings and the cracks that ran beneath the house like veins. All speaking, not to accuse, but to be heard. And Ellis listened. He stood in the center of their noise, and he didn't run, didn't weep. He just listened. And as he did, their voices began to blend, not into chaos, but into a chorus. A message. You were supposed to tell our stories. The walls trembled. The floor quaked. Another mirror fell from above, unbroken, untouched. It hovered in front of him like an open door. On it, a single phrase burned bright, "You still can." And below that, a new name, one he hadn't heard before. Maybelline Stokes, age 6, disappeared 1961. Then another, Jamal Deeks, age 4. Died in attic fire 1977. One by one, names spilled down the mirror. Children lost in silence. Children who were never remembered properly. Children the world had forgotten. But the house had not. It had preserved them. It had kept them alive the only way it knew how. Ellis stepped forward, placed his hand on the mirror, and this time, it didn't pull him in. It gave him something. A pen, simple, black, heavy, real. In his other hand, a notebook, fresh, empty. Its cover said nothing, but inside, the first page had already been written, in Sarah's handwriting. You always said the scariest stories were the true ones. Now write them, write us. He looked up. The mirror was gone. The room was gone. He stood in his study again. Sunlight poured in through the open windows. The air smelled like summer. And the book lay open in front of him, waiting. He picked up the pen, opened the notebook, and wrote the first name, Maybelline Stokes, then the second, Jamal Deeks, and the third, and the fourth, until the pages began to fill, and the house behind him sighed in satisfaction, no longer haunted, just heard. And in the faint reflection of his study window, Sarah stood behind him, smiling. There was something different about the second floor now. Ellis hadn't been up there since the mirror room collapsed into sound and memory. That experience still hummed beneath his skin, lingering not like a wound, but like a forgotten melody he couldn't quite shake. The names he'd written in the notebook, Maybelline Stokes, Jamal Deeks, the countless others, they had weight. Not as burdens, but as anchors. Truths finally brought to the surface after years of silence. The notebook now sat closed on his desk, heavy as a tombstone, quiet as a candle just extinguished. But the house still had more to give. He felt it the moment he stepped into the hall. The light was wrong. Not dim, not flickering, just off. It wasn't the golden hue of morning or the pale shimmer of dusk. It was flat. As if the house had chosen to hold its breath for what came next. The walls stood still. No creaks. No shifting beams. But there was something in the air, a pressure behind the eyes, a whisper against the spine. The stairs stretched before him, ordinary, familiar. But as he placed his foot on the first step, he heard it a faint tick, 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 like a metronome buried inside the wood. Not a clock, a warning. He climbed anyway, slowly. Each step carried a sound like breath drawn too sharply through teeth. Tick, tick, tick. When he reached the top, the hallway wasn't how he remembered it. The walls were longer, the floor narrower, as if the house had bent its shape inward, compressing memory and architecture together. Pictures hung along the walls, ones he didn't recognize. Not his family, not Sarah, not even people. Really, just rooms, endless rooms, painted halls with locked doors, beds turned upside down, chairs stacked in corners like barricades. The end of the hallway pulsed with darkness, not blackness, just the absence of light. And then he saw it, a staircase. Not leading to an attic or a basement. Not part of the original house. It stood behind a door he swore had never existed, centered like a dream's logic made real. Its steps twisted upward, not spiraling, not linear. More like a path designed to make you forget which way was forward. He opened the door, stepped in, and started climbing. The air changed after the fourth step. He noticed it in the way his breath echoed back at him. Not delayed, not distorted, but repeated. Like something behind him was mimicking rather than following. By the 10th step, the walls around him had vanished entirely. The staircase floated now, suspended in a hollow space that defied dimension. There was no ceiling above him, no floor below, just the steps. Endless. Silent. Waiting. And then, halfway through the next step, his foot sank. Not like through mist, like through skin. He yanked it back, gasping, and watched as the step beneath him pulsed. The wood had turned soft, flesh-like. He crouched, touched it, and it moved, twitched. The stair was warm, alive, and it whispered. A child's voice, barely a breath. "Don't go up," he froze. Another voice, different. "Don't leave us here." And then another. "Don't forget our names." The staircase had become something else. Not a path, a grave. Beneath each step, a name. He crouched again, brushed away the dust from the next plank. There it was, carved in rough, desperate lines. Thomas, 1988. Another step up. Ivy, 1992. He kept going. Name after name. Some unfinished, some overwritten, all children. All here. The staircase was built from memory, from the forgotten. Every tread and riser crafted by the silence that followed their ends. And the higher he climbed, the louder the voices became. Not in protest, in pleading. "Tell them about me. Don't let me be just a file. I had a favorite song. Write that down. I was real." He pressed forward, not because he wanted to, because he had to, until finally the stairs ended. Abruptly. No top step, no landing, just a sheer drop into nothing. Ellis stood at the edge, the last name beneath his feet glowing faintly. Sarah Grady, 2017. But she hadn't died in 2017. She had died long before that, hadn't she? His mouth went dry. He knelt, touched her name. It burned. The staircase trembled, and suddenly he saw not a memory, a truth. The fire had not taken her instantly. There had been time. Seconds, moments, a choice, and he had waited, just 1 second too long. Not out of fear, out of doubt. The stairs shattered beneath him. Not violently, they simply gave way, and Ellis fell. Not downward, backward, through the years. Through every step he'd taken. Through each name he'd passed. And then, he was in the hallway again. Back on the second floor. The door to the impossible staircase gone, no trace. Just an old linen closet. He stood in front of it for a long time, breathing hard. Then he opened the door, and there, on the top shelf, was a photograph. Sarah, smiling, holding hands with 2 other children he didn't recognize. Behind them the staircase, the one that led nowhere. He turned the photo over. On the back, written in crayon, "We remember." "Do you?" He placed the photo in the notebook, and for the first time he wrote not just a name, but a story. From memory, from truth. Rain came with the morning. Not in fury, but in that steady, deliberate way that soaks the bones of old places. Ellis stood at the front window, notebook in one hand, coffee in the other, watching the street blur into streaks of gray. The house around him felt different. Not haunted, not angry, resigned. As if it had hoped he'd stop at the staircase, hoped he'd turn back and let it keep what it had buried. But he hadn't. He'd remembered. And now, the house had no choice but to remember too. Behind him, the air shifted. A picture frame fell from the hallway wall. Glass shattered. The sound wasn't sharp, it was tired. Ellis turned, set the coffee down, and picked up the frame. It was one of Sarah's old drawings, a sun with a smile, a house with too many windows, and a stick figure labeled "Me" with arms outstretched. But beneath the glass, a new detail had emerged. A second figure, smaller, half-faded, drawn in charcoal, not crayon. It hadn't been there before. It looked unfinished, like someone started sketching, and then stopped, unsure of whether they were allowed to be remembered. He peeled the back off the frame and pulled the paper free. On the bottom corner, there was a date. Not Sarah's handwriting. Someone else's. 1953. Long before this house was his. Long before Sarah. Long before any of it. He turned it over. Another note, barely visible. Written in pencil, she lived here too. But the house didn't want to keep her. The moment he read it, a floorboard groaned beneath his feet. Not with movement, with guilt. The house wasn't just haunted by memory. It was ashamed of it. And that meant it was hiding something bigger than ghosts. Bigger than forgotten names. It was hiding her. Whoever she was. He moved quickly now. The rain thudded harder against the roof, as if trying to warn him, or maybe wash the truth away before it could be found. He opened the hallway closet again, but the stairs hadn't returned. No mirror rooms. No crawl spaces. Just coats and the faint smell of old cedar. But something tugged at him. Not physically, not even spiritually. It was an idea blooming like rot under wallpaper. There had to be another place. One that didn't want to be found. One the house itself had forgotten on purpose. He went to the kitchen. Pushed aside the table. And looked down. There, beneath the rug, was a square outline. Faint, warped with age, but unmistakable. A trapdoor. He pried it open. Dust exploded upward. The air smelled of wet wood and secrets long kept. A narrow wooden ladder descended into dark, dry silence. He climbed. The space beneath was shallow, no taller than his shoulders, stretching maybe 10 feet in every direction. No shelves. No furniture. Just dirt, stone, and something at the center. A child's chair, wooden, painted blue long ago, chipped now, facing a wall that wasn't a wall at all. It was a door, only half the size of a regular one. Ellis stepped forward. The door didn't have a handle. Just a name. Etched in nail-scratched letters, Lottie. He whispered it. The door opened on its own. And beyond it, a room. It shouldn't have fit beneath the house. It shouldn't have existed. But it did. The ceiling was low, made from beams that creaked as if remembering too much. Toys were scattered around the room, all handmade, a cloth doll missing one eye, a spinning top, a wooden train. Every item was covered in dust, but not decay. Time hadn't touched them, not really. It had just turned its back. He stepped inside. The door closed behind him, and suddenly, he couldn't hear the rain anymore. Couldn't hear anything. The silence was thick, intentional, and in that silence, he felt it someone watching. Then a whisper, not from the walls, not from the floor, from the ceiling. "I never left," the voice said. But they stopped looking. He raised his head slowly. There, tucked between two beams, were two small eyes. Wide, curious, unblinking. And then she dropped. Not hard, not fast, just landed. A little girl, 5, maybe 6, dressed in a yellow nightgown smeared with soot and ink. Her feet were bare. She didn't look hurt, but she didn't look right either. Her skin was too still. Her mouth never moved when she spoke again. "They put me here because I wouldn't be quiet." Ellis crouched. "Lottie," she nodded once. No emotion, just fact. "Who put you here?" She tilted her head, as if trying to remember. Then she whispered, "The house." And then the floor quaked. A tremor so sharp it knocked Ellis to his knees. Lottie didn't move. She just pointed to the far wall. There was something buried there. He crawled over and began to dig with his hands, pushing dirt aside, clawing through time. And then, his fingers hit something solid. A box. He pulled it out. Inside, dozens of old photographs. Children, all different. Some smiling, some crying. And on the back of each photo, a single word erased. Lottie came to stand beside him. "They forgot us, but the house didn't." He looked at her. "Why now?" She looked up. And for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes. "Because it wants to forget you too." The room trembled again. Harder this time. The door vanished. The toys burst into flame, not fire, not heat, just ash, crumbling like they'd never been real. And from the shadows, the house began to speak. Not in voices, in memories. It projected them onto the walls, flickering images of Ellis's own life. The worst parts, his failures, his silence, his guilt, the things he'd buried, the things he'd tried to fix too late. It was fighting back, trying to reclaim its silence. But Ellis stood. He held the box of photographs high and shouted over the storm inside the walls. "You don't get to forget them. Not anymore." Lottie smiled, and then vanished. Gone like smoke in the wind, the door reappeared. Ellis climbed out, box in hand. And as he sealed the trapdoor behind him, the rain stopped, the silence lifted. The house didn't sigh, it wept. And Ellis, finally, understood why. Because remembering hurts more than anything. But forgetting, that's what kills. Ellis couldn't sleep that night. Not because of fear. He'd long since passed the threshold where fear ruled him. But because something had shifted in the air. It wasn't dread. It wasn't grief. It was the weight of knowing that the house itself had tried to bury a child's memory. Not just Lottie's name, but her existence. That room, that trapdoor, it hadn't been sealed off by time. It had been hidden by intent, not the intent of people. The house, the structure. As if the wood and plaster and foundation had developed a memory of their own, and more dangerously, a preference for what should be remembered and what should not. Now, it was angry. Not in the obvious way. No slamming doors, no broken glass. But Ellis could feel it in every wall, every floorboard. A subtle thrum, like a pulse in the dark. The house was alive in the worst way, no longer grieving, no longer haunted, but defensive. He stood in the hallway that led to his study, holding the box of photographs he'd unearthed from beneath the trapdoor. A few still sat on top, faded black, and whites, each with a child's face staring just past the camera, not smiling, not posed, caught mid-motion, mid-thought, real, unfiltered. And on the back of every photo, the same single word, stamped like a brand in crooked ink erased. He flipped the next one. The name had been scratched out, not just crossed, gouged. As if whatever had done it wanted to make sure the identity beneath could never be pieced back together. He ran his thumb over the torn fibers. They were rough, still splintered. Fresh, which meant something, or someone, was still editing. He moved toward the wall of the hallway, driven by instinct, and pressed his palm against the plaster. It was cold, damp, breathing. The longer he kept his hand there, the more he felt it. A hum just beneath the surface, like a machine trying to restart after too many years of stillness. He stepped back, grabbed a pencil from the desk drawer, and began drawing a line on the wall. Nothing dramatic, just a simple stroke, straight and downward. A test. The house responded. The line blood, not ink, not paint, something darker. The pencil left a mark, but it wasn't graphite that followed. From the crack in the plaster, a black ooze began to seep, a thick, tar-like substance that shimmered as if alive. It ran downward in slow trails, tracing the pencil's path perfectly, until it reached the floor and pooled like spilled oil. Ellis knelt, dipped his fingertip into it. It was warm. And when he looked at his finger, he saw it wasn't ink at all. It was writing. Tiny words crawling along his skin like ants. Thousands of them. Names. Dates. Phrases like "she screamed for hours." They forgot the window was locked. He watched and said nothing. He wiped his hand on his jeans. The words didn't smear. They stayed. Permanent. Living the wall in front of him began to change. Not visibly, but he could hear it. A scratching. A furious scrawl. It was rewriting itself. He stepped back in time to watch a shape form beneath the paint. A rectangular outline. A panel that hadn't been there before. He pried at the edges with the flat of his pencil, and it gave way. Inside was paper. Dozens of pages, stapled together. Each one filled top to bottom with names, dates, and causes of death. But these weren't police records. These were versions. Each name had multiple entries. One child fell downstairs, crossed out. Then accident with tools, crossed out. Finally choked on food, unchecked, accepted. The house hadn't just hidden memories. It had rewritten them, over and over again, until no one remembered what really happened. It had made its own narrative. Ellis looked up, throat tight. "How many lies have you told?" The house groaned in reply. The floor beneath him shifted. Suddenly, the wood split open, not violently, but precisely, and revealed a new corridor. Unlit, beckoning. He knew what this was. A dare. An invitation. An ultimatum. Keep digging, and the house would open everything. But it would make him feel every lie, every revision, every erased scream. Every time it had chosen comfort over truth. He took the flashlight from his drawer and entered. The corridor wasn't part of the original floor plan. He was sure of it. It was too narrow, too curved, like it had been stitched into the bones of the house afterward. The walls were covered in writing, not etched. Drawn, with children's hands. Crayon, charcoal, ink, even blood. Messages like, "I told the truth and they changed it. No one believed me." He said, "I made it up." Ellis passed each message slowly, reading them aloud as he moved. "I hear you," he said after each one. And after a while, they started to reply. Whispers, short bursts, voices behind the walls. One boy, "My name was Jacob. They said I ran away. I didn't." He locked the door. A girl, "I left my bracelet under the stairs. It's still there. It's still there." Another, "I saw Lottie. She wasn't supposed to talk. But she did." The tunnel ended in a room no bigger than a walk-in closet. At the center, an old printing press. Its rollers crusted with dried ink, its tray filled with blank sheets. Ellis approached, touched it. It turned on. No electricity. No hum. Just motion. The tray lit up. A blank page slid forward. Then, text appeared. Line after line. Typed in that same crooked style from the photographs. But this time, it wasn't a death certificate. It was a confession. From the house. A record of every child it had silenced. Not as victims of ghosts or goals, but of neglect, of lies, of rewrites. The house had tried to keep itself safe. From blame, from memory, from him. But it couldn't anymore. He took the page, folded it, placed it in the notebook. Then the press whispered a single word from nowhere. Again, another blank sheet appeared. And Ellis began to read. The notebook was no longer empty. Its pages had filled quicker than Ellis could explain, faster than he could write. What had begun as names, Maybelline, Jamal, Lottie, had turned into full pages, entire stories unfurling in the quiet hum of the house. But Ellis hadn't written them. Not fully. Not with his own memory. The words came like a pulse, his hand moving while his thoughts trailed behind. It was as if the ink itself remembered, and the house merely guided it. He sat at the kitchen table now, in the center of the home that had grown quieter not with peace, but with focus. The house wasn't fighting anymore. It wasn't lashing out. It was waiting, holding its breath, if such a thing were possible, and Ellis knew why. Each page completed in the notebook brought him closer to a name that hadn't been written yet. One that lingered like a half-spoken sentence at the back of every wall. His. He didn't know what form his own story would take. He feared it. Not for what it would say, but for what it would prove. That in the house's long, complicated history of erasure, silence, and rewritten truths, he hadn't been an exception. He'd been part of the problem. Not through violence or cruelty, but through hesitation. Through the 1,000 quiet moments where speaking up or stepping in might have changed the course of someone else's pain. The notebook lay open before him. Blank page, inked pen. A single line already scribbled on the top. The man who watched the house forget. He closed it quickly. He wasn't ready for that. Not yet. Instead, he went back upstairs, to Sarah's room. The door creaked open, and the light inside was different now. Not the warm gold of memory, not the cold blue of grief. A stillness, like a lake before a storm. The room had rearranged itself again. The bed pushed against the wall, her drawings framed and straightened. But one thing stood out, a stack of books on her nightstand. On top, a new one, hardback, leather-bound. No title. He picked it up and opened to the first page. It was a story. Not one he'd written. Not one he remembered reading. But it was about a little girl who lived in a house that spoke in dreams. A house that tried to be kind, but didn't know how. And a father who learned too late how to listen. The girl's name wasn't Sarah in the book. It was Linny. And yet, everything in the story mirrored their lives. The drawings. The laughter. The night she woke up crying and told him there was something under her bed, and he dismissed it as just a bad dream. He remembered that night clearly now. But in the book, he checked. He looked. And he found her. The ending was different. Happy. He flipped to the final page, and there in her handwriting, unmistakably Sarah's, was a note, "You get to write the real one now." He held the book against his chest, breath caught somewhere between a sob and a prayer. She wasn't angry. Not anymore. Maybe she never had been. She'd just been waiting for him to understand. The floor creaked behind him. He turned slowly. There stood a boy, maybe 7, dressed in shorts and a collared shirt, hair wet, skin pale. Ellis knew him immediately. He'd seen the photo. Jamal Deeks. The boy didn't speak, just stared. His eyes weren't accusing. They were tired. Ellis knelt. "Do you want me to write yours now?" Jamal nodded. Ellis opened the notebook to a fresh page. Began to write. Jamal sat on the edge of the bed, silent. As Ellis wrote, the pen moved with ease. The facts came: the year, the fire, the attic door that hadn't been fireproofed properly, the faulty wiring no one reported, the way he'd been forgotten by inspectors, written off as a missing person. But the ending. Ellis paused, looked at Jamal. "What do you want it to say?" Jamal's lips moved for the first time. "Say I didn't scream." Ellis blinked. "What?" The boy looked down. "They always say I screamed. But I didn't. I was trying to be brave." Ellis nodded. "Okay." He wrote it in the last paragraph. Jamal didn't scream. He stayed quiet, brave. He waited for help that never came, but he never stopped believing someone would find him. The moment the sentence ended, Jamal stood, walked toward the door, turned back only once, and smiled. Then he vanished, like smoke, like closure. Ellis returned to the hallway. The walls shimmered faintly now. Their surface no longer cracked or bleeding ink. They pulsed softly, like paper rising under a breath. He could almost hear the house saying thank you. But it wasn't done. Not yet. In the study, a final page now waited in the notebook. Blank. But this time, there was no prompt, no line, no title, only a reflection. The window pane beside the desk had turned to glassy black, like a mirror, and in it, Ellis saw not just himself, but every child he had written for, standing behind him, silent, watching. And he heard Sarah's voice. "One last time, you don't need to save everyone. Just don't forget them." He placed his hand on the notebook, took the pen, and began to write. "I was a man who almost forgot. But I didn't. Not all the way. And maybe that's enough." The wind picked up outside. The pages turned themselves. And the house, for the first time in years, was quiet. Not because it was hiding, because it was heard. Rain returned the next day, but this time it didn't sound like morning. It pattered lightly, a hush instead of a howl, as if the sky was being gentle for once. Ellis sat in the dining room with the notebook laid open in front of him. The pages no longer blank, no longer hesitant. They were full of names now, some real, some remembered, some previously erased. It was like holding a cemetery between two covers, but not one built from stone and grass. This one lived, breathed, whispered. He didn't write that morning, didn't even touch the pen. He just sat, letting the silence settle over his shoulders like a blanket he'd forgotten the comfort of. The house, too, had grown quiet, not in that dreadful, expectant way, but in the way someone listens when they know they've finally been understood. The usual creaks and sighs were gone. The groans in the pipes had softened. The air no longer carried that sour, heavy weight of memory turned sour. For once, the house rested. But Ellis knew it wouldn't last. There was still one story missing. One thread left dangling like a nerve exposed. And as much as he wanted to believe the notebook was complete, that this entire storm had finally passed. He knew the house wasn't finished with him. It started that afternoon. A single sound, a knock, not on the door, from inside the walls. 3 times, even rhythmic, calculated. He froze, waited, nothing. Then, 3 more. This time from a different wall, and then again from the floor. It moved like a signal looking for its destination. He stood, following the sound like a hunter stalking an animal that didn't want to be found. Through the kitchen. Down the hall, toward the fireplace. The sound grew sharper there, more purposeful, not frantic, not even angry, just there. And in the brickwork of the fireplace, something shifted. A stone, discolored and misaligned. Ellis knelt, ran his fingers along the edge, and felt a groove, deep, purposeful. He pressed it. There was a click, and the back wall of the fireplace slid open, revealing a space behind the hearth. Not a passage, not even a hidden room, just a compartment. Inside, wrapped in waxed cloth, was a bundle of pages, old, singed at the edges. Some were charred black, others still intact. He carried it carefully to the table, unwrapping it 1 layer at a time. They weren't written in pen. They were typed, each one headed with the same words, in bold The Kyle di Randobe Choneni Armcom. A manuscript, his manuscript, one he'd never written. Not in this life, not in this reality. But there it was, page after page. Each chapter detailing a child who had lived in the house and vanished. Lottie, Jamal, Maybelline, dozens of others. Their stories weren't just factual, they were personal. As if written by someone who had known them. Remembered the way they laughed, the way they hid when afraid, the things they loved. He recognized the rhythm of the sentences, the flow of the paragraphs. It was his voice. But he hadn't written these, not yet. He flipped to the last page. There, typed in uneven ink, you promised you'd finish this. We kept waiting, but the house grew tired of waiting. The air around him shifted. The temperature dropped. From the window, the rain stopped mid-fall. The world paused, and then the page burned, right in front of him. No fire, no flame, just heat. A sizzle across the paper as it darkened from the center out, curling, cracking, disintegrating into blackened dust. The next page followed, and the next. They began to incinerate on their own, as if time had reached its patience limit. Ellis scrambled, trying to blow on them, smother them, save them. But the destruction continued. Every record, every truth, every lost story turning to ash. No, he whispered. No, not now. Then, a voice, low, deep, not from a throat, from the walls. You don't get to remember only when it's safe. And then the floor beneath him opened. Not in collapse, but in invitation. A hole, round and endless, forming right under the table. Ellis didn't run. He dove. He had to. He fell into blackness, down through layers of cold and heat and silence and screams. Through moments that weren't his but felt connected. Through memories too fragmented to belong to any one person. And then, he landed, hardwood, in the original blueprint of the house. He recognized it from the old documents he'd found months ago. The version built long before electricity, before additions, before drywall and paint and family photos. This was the first version, the house as it began. He stood slowly. There were no doors here, no lights. Just walls covered in ink, not painted, not written, but bled. The very walls had absorbed the stories and now cried them back out. In front of him, a single desk, old, rotting. On it 1 page, white, empty. But a pen hovered just above it, as if held by unseen hands. Ellis stepped closer, and as he approached, the ink began to drip from the ceiling. Slow, heavy, thick, it landed on the page. Formed a name, Sarah Grady. He stared at it, hands trembling. He had already written her story. He'd lived it. But now, the house wanted more. It wanted the truth, not about her death, but about the silence that followed. The way he closed the door on it. The way he let guilt smother her memory into ritual instead of resolution. The way he told himself, day after day, that she wouldn't want him to hurt anymore, when really, she just wanted him to see her. Still, he picked up the pen. wrote one word she, and stopped. Because the rest didn't come from him. The ink continued flowing from the walls, dripping onto the page, finishing the sentence. Ah was never forgotten, but she thought she was. The pen fell from his hand. He wept, not from pain, from understanding. And as the ink dried, the room around him lifted. He rose with it. The blackness faded. The cold retreated. And when he opened his eyes, he was back at the kitchen table. The notebook in front of him, the manuscript pages gone, but the final line still fresh on the page, waiting, alive. And outside, for the first time in weeks, the sun broke through the clouds. A beam of light hit the wall, and in its glow, a shadow, small, still, smiling. The morning arrived not with sunlight, but with breath. Ellis couldn't describe it any other way. It felt like the house exhaled. Through every crevice in the walls, every joint in the beams, every place memory once clung like moss. It wasn't a sigh of relief, and it wasn't exhaustion. It was something else. Something living, something awake. The house was no longer a container for what had happened. It was participating now, and whatever came next, it would not let him walk through it as a mere witness. He sat at the dining table again. It had become his makeshift altar. The notebook laid open like scripture, the pen beside it like a relic too heavy to lift. Around him, the photos he'd collected were spread across the surface. Names he'd recovered, faces once scrubbed away by time. Lottie, Jamal, Maybelline. So many others. Yet the more he looked, the more he realized something had shifted during the night. Each photo had changed. Not the images themselves, but the backgrounds. Where once there had been wallpaper, furniture, or forest behind the children, there now appeared blurred, impossible doorways, angles that didn't exist in the real world. Some showed sharp corners that folded into themselves like origami. Others revealed staircases hanging in the air, leading nowhere. One photo had an entire hallway lined with doors, but every door was open, and in each one stood the same child, repeating endlessly, each a step closer to the camera. Ellis touched the edge of that one. It was cold. The house pulsed. He stood. The sound came again, a heartbeat, low, rhythmic, coming from beneath the floorboards. Not just a vibration, a calling. He followed it without thinking, through the hall, past Sarah's room, downstairs, into the basement. Not the broken, mold-choked basement he'd known in the early days. This one was rebuilt, refined. The stone walls gleamed with damp light. The dirt floor had turned to black wood, warped, but solid. A single bulb swayed from the ceiling. No cord, no source. It moved as if pulled by breath alone. And in the center of the room stood a figure. Not a ghost, not a memory, but him. Ellis froze. The figure looked identical. Same lines in the face, same scar near the temple from a childhood bike accident. Same posture, even the way the left shoulder slouched slightly from years of desk work. The other Ellis turned, smiled, but it wasn't kind. It was knowing. You wanted truth, the double said. Ellis didn't respond. You wanted stories, it continued, stepping closer. But you forgot the first rule of storytelling, he swallowed, which is, the smile widened too wide. Truth always bleeds. The double reached into its coat and pulled something out. A page. Folded. Clean. The kind of paper Ellis knew instinctively belonged to his notebook. The double handed it to him. He unfolded it. The heading read "Etia Memoir, H1 Owen Tell." Below that, no text, just a date, November 2nd, 2017. The day after the fire. He almost dropped it. He remembered that day vividly. The smell of smoke soaked into his clothes. The quiet house, filled with too much silence. The pitying looks from neighbors. But more than that, he remembered the sound. The knock at the door, and the girl on the other side. Not a stranger, not a rescuer. Sarah, alive, burned, yes, fragile, yes, but breathing. He had opened the door. She had whispered one thing: I didn't want to go back in. And he had made the worst decision of his life. He'd told her to wait. I have to call someone, he'd said. You'll be safer here, just for a second. But when he turned back, She was gone, vanished. No footprints in the snow. No note. No evidence she'd ever stood there. And no one had believed him. No one would. The fire had been too thorough. The remains too convincing. The grief counselors too ready with their conclusions. They told him he was hallucinating. That trauma made the mind fill in blanks. But he knew. He had seen her, touched her. He had a second chance, and he lost it. Again. Not through fire, but through hesitation. He clutched the page tightly. The other Ellis stepped closer. "Tell that story," it said. "Write that one." Ellis looked down at the paper. The ink hadn't blood. Not yet, but he felt it vibrating in his hands, ready to vanish if he didn't act. He turned and ran, up the stairs, down the hallway, back to the dining table. The notebook sat waiting. He opened to the final page, and wrote. He wrote every word, every second, the knock, the whisper, the pause, the loss, and as he wrote the final line, "She was alive, and I let her slip away again." The page pulsed under his palm, not violently, but with relief. The house exhaled again, this time not from breath, from release. The light in the room dimmed not with power failure, but with softness. Something loosened in the walls, and for the first time, Ellis heard no names, no whispers, just wind, real wind, outside alive. And when he looked up, Sarah stood in the doorway. Not burned, not broken, not a ghost, not a memory. Her eyes were older, wiser, but still hers. She smiled, small and sad. He remembered. Ellis stood, heart caught in his throat. "I never stopped," he said. She nodded. "That's all I wanted." Then she looked to the side. Behind her, every child he'd written for. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were free now. She turned back to him. "You're almost done," she said. One story left. He knew which one she meant. His own. And as she stepped backward into the hallway, slowly fading, he sat again, opened the notebook, and turned to the first truly blank page. The pen felt heavier now. Not because of its weight, but because of what it had become. An instrument of release, confession, and consequence. Ellis sat at the dining room table, the final blank page of the notebook staring back at him like an open eye. The house around him had gone silent again, but not out of menace. This silence was attentive, waiting. Everything he had written had come from memory or revelation. Ghosts and rooms and voices in the walls, names once forgotten now bound in ink. But this last page, this one would be different. It wouldn't be about them. It would be about him. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. He took a breath and pressed the pen to the paper. "I was not born into a haunted house. I built one around myself." That first sentence came easily. Too easily. He stopped, let the weight of it settle before continuing. Not with wood and nails, but with silence. "With every moment I saw something wrong and said nothing. With every time I walked away instead of toward." He paused again. The room stayed still, but something behind the walls shifted. Not in anger, not in fear, but in attention. The house wasn't just listening. It was remembering with him. He continued. "Sarah's death broke me, but not in the way people think. It didn't turn me into a ghost hunter. It didn't inspire me to fight. It made me afraid of myself. The truth spilled out faster now. I became a man who studied grief so he didn't have to feel it. I learned how to write about loss so I wouldn't have to sit in mine. I cataloged other people's hauntings so I didn't have to confront my own." He wrote until his hand ached, until the page blurred with more than just ink, until the pen trembled under the force of his own honesty. "I called it research, I called it work, but it was hiding, a performance." A noise interrupted him. Sharp, small, a knock on glass. He looked up. In the window beside the front door, his own face, not a reflection, not a trick of light. Him, again, the same double from the basement, but this time, it was outside, waiting, watching, and it wasn't smiling. Ellis stood slowly. The notebook remained open behind him. The air tightened. Every inch of the house seemed to resist his steps as he approached the door. The knob turned without force. the hinges silent as he pulled it open. The street outside was empty. No rain, no wind, no shadowed figure. But in the center of the porch, a package, wrapped in newspaper, bound with twine. He stepped forward and lifted it. It was heavy, alive with warmth. He brought it inside, placed it on the table beside the notebook, and unwrapped it. Inside, a typewriter. Old, manual, keys worn and blackened. The ribbon was fresh, though, new, unused. Beside it, a single sheet of paper already loaded. Typed across the top, in perfect alignment, tell the truth, even if it undoes you. Ellis swallowed hard. He pulled the chair closer and set his fingers to the keys. They felt familiar, almost too familiar. And when he began to type, the sound echoed not just through the room, but through the bones of the house. Each keystroke was a ripple, a punch, a wound. He didn't type fiction. He typed facts. His first job, where he saw a child bruised and said nothing. A phone call he ignored from his sister that turned out to be her final attempt at connection. A friend who begged for help, who he quietly judged instead. Sentence by sentence, he laid out his failures, not the dramatic ones, but the slow, everyday kinds. The ones people get away with. The ones that echo longest. And with each line, the house began to change. The wallpaper curled. Floorboards popped softly, as though exhaling. Shadows along the ceiling shimmered like water before evaporating. Ellis kept going. No excuses. No redemptive twist. Just the raw, bitter fabric of who he had been. Finally, he wrote the last line. I became a man more haunted by what he didn't do than what he did. He pulled the page from the typewriter, placed it in the notebook, and closed it. The moment the cover touched itself, the room shuddered. Not violently, but deeply, like a sigh from below the earth. He stood, unsure what would happen next. And that's when the walls began to open, not crack, not collapse. Open. In slow, spiraling motion, the drywall peeled itself back. The studs parted, and behind them, hundreds of photos. Polaroids, film, digital. All children. All laughing. All whole. None of them afraid. They weren't warnings. They weren't ghosts. They were free. One photo fluttered down from above, landing at his feet. He picked it up. Sarah, 7 years old, on a swing, laughing. On the back, a note in crayon, thank you for remembering me right. He smiled through the tears. Then a sound behind him made him turn. The front door, wide open, not by wind, by invitation. Light streamed in, warm, real, and for the first time, the house didn't breathe like it was holding something in. It breathed like it had finally let everything go. Ellis walked outside. He didn't close the door behind him. The house would do that on its own, when it was ready. And as he stepped into the street, the notebook still warm under his arm, he knew one thing: some houses don't need to be torn down. They need to be heard. Ellis didn't walk far, just to the edge of the yard, where the sidewalk met the old iron gate. He stopped there, hands in his coat pockets, the notebook tucked under one arm, like it had always been meant to live there. The sun had fully broken through now. The sky was a bruised kind of blue, fresh and fragile. The air tasted different, less like dust, more like water. And behind him, the house stood still with its front door wide open, like a mouth that had finished confessing. He turned, half expecting the facade to warp back into something haunted, shadows crawling, windows blackened with resentment. But it didn't. It just stood there, watching, breathing perhaps, but not menacing. Not anymore. It looked tired. That's when he saw them. Children. Not in flesh, but in impression. At first just one, a boy standing in Sarah's window, staring out with a kind of gentle solemnity. Then two more appeared by the stairs, watching silently. Not ghosts, not quite. More like the house's final memory surfacing in daylight before it disappeared for good. They were still there because they wanted to be seen. That was the whole point of everything, wasn't it? He stepped back inside without knowing why. The temperature hadn't changed. No creaks. No groans. He climbed the stairs slowly. At the landing, he stopped. There were markings on the wall now. Not threatening carvings or ancient glyphs, just heights. Dozens of tiny lines drawn in pencil, dates scrawled next to them. He ran a finger along them. They weren't Sarah's. They weren't even his. These were children who had never been recorded. But the house had kept them. Quietly, guiltily. One marking stood higher than the rest. In fresh pencil, SG age 10. Sarah would have turned 10 last week. A noise behind him. Footsteps, light, not sneaking, just small. He turned, expecting to see another child. Instead, he saw himself. Not the double from before. Not the mocking shade. A younger version. Maybe 10 or 11. Standing there barefoot, wearing the same striped shirt from the photo Ellis's mother used to keep in her wallet. The boy was holding a small wooden car. One of the ones Ellis had made with his father, back when they still talked. The boy said nothing, just held the car out. Ellis took it, fingers brushing the tiny chipped edges. He remembered this exact toy. He'd thrown it against a wall when his father left. Screamed that it didn't matter, that it didn't mean anything. But the house had kept it, because he hadn't. The boy turned and walked down the hallway, fading with each step, gone by the time he reached the end. Ellis stood there alone. Then the lights flickered, not violently, but like they were gathering strength. A whisper came, but not from the walls, from the notebook. He opened it. A new page had formed. Just a few words, written in handwriting not his own. There's one more room. He didn't need to ask where. He already knew. The attic. He hadn't gone there since the fire. The floor had collapsed, made it too dangerous. But now, something told him it would be waiting intact, like the house had kept it for last. He reached the ladder. The wood was smooth, untouched by soot or water. He climbed. Every step felt lighter than the last. The hatch opened on its own, and what lay above was impossible. The attic was massive, endless. It stretched farther than the house itself ever could. An ocean of rafters and beams and shelves, and on every shelf boxes, each labeled, each sealed. He walked forward, drawn to one in particular. The label read Farga Owen Par Poes. He opened it. Inside letters, hundreds, maybe thousands. Some unopened, some returned to sender, some never sent at all. He reached for the top one. It was addressed to him, postmarked 2 weeks after Sarah died. From his sister. He hadn't known she'd written. Hands trembling, he opened it. I'm scared for you. I know how this looks, how this feels. But please don't let this house bury you. Come stay with us. Just for a little. We want to help. He remembered seeing her number flash on his phone. Remembered not answering. Back then, silence had felt safer than acceptance. He kept reading. Each letter told a different kind of grief. A friend who never got a reply. A cousin who'd sent photos. A stranger who'd found his address from an article and wrote about her own lost child. He sat down. Surrounded by the proof that he hadn't been alone, he'd only acted like it. The house had held on to all of it. Not as punishment, as proof. He pulled the notebook from under his arm and placed it on the attic floor. It opened to the last page again. Waiting. He wrote, I thought this house wanted to hurt me. It didn't. It wanted to remind me. That silence was never protection. That forgetting isn't healing. That grief left alone becomes something monstrous. As he finished the sentence, the attic changed. Not violently, but truthfully. Every box began to hum, a soft vibration. Then, open. The letters flew upward like ash in reverse. They spun in the air, merged, became light, became language, and the rafters echoed with voices, hundreds of them. Laughter, crying, singing, not scary. Human. Ellis watched it all, tears falling freely now. He had done what the house couldn't do for itself. He remembered. And in doing so, gave the house what it never had: forgiveness. He closed the notebook. Climbed down the ladder. The door to the attic shut gently behind him. When he reached the front hallway again, the air was different. Alive, but peaceful. He walked out the open door. The wind brushed his face like a hand across skin. He didn't look back this time. He didn't need to. The house would be fine now. It had finally told its story, and so had he. Ellis didn't turn back, but the house followed him anyway. Not in shape or sound, not with footsteps or whispers. It followed him the way certain smells never quite leave your skin, the way silence feels after a scream has finally stopped. The weight was gone, but its imprint remained, like a scar that didn't ache anymore, but still shaped the skin. He reached the sidewalk and paused, the notebook still warm under his arm, as if it had absorbed the lives written into it and wasn't ready to cool off yet. The street was quiet. Not eerily so. Just the kind of stillness that comes after something important has finished happening. There was no traffic, no wind, no neighbor's dog barking like it always had. Just the distant hum of something beginning to settle. He kept walking, passing the old maple with its hollow base, the cracked pavement where the Grady house's garden once fought to grow. The town hadn't changed, but he had. And that meant the town would feel different now, whether it knew it or not. When he reached the edge of the neighborhood, he sat down on a low stone wall, the kind of place kids used to balance across on their way to school, playing games with rules they made up as they went. He looked down at the notebook again, now heavy with finality. He thought about tossing it, not in anger, not in fear, just to end it. To let the pages scatter in the wind, carry their stories far away, but he couldn't. He knew better now. Truth doesn't get scattered, it gets carried. So he opened the book, turned to a blank page, and wrote only one word: legacy. Then he closed it and held it on his lap, letting the wind tug at the edges. Behind him, the air shifted. Not from movement, from presence. He turned. A girl stood there. Not Sarah. Not one of the forgotten, just a girl. Backpack slung over one shoulder. Hoodie with frayed sleeves. Probably 12 or 13. She stared at him, cautious but curious. The way a kid sizes up an adult they're not sure they trust yet. "You're the guy from the house," she said. He nodded. "Yeah." She looked past him, toward the road that curved around the neighborhood. "People say it's haunted." Ellis smiled faintly. It was. She stepped a little closer, squinting at the notebook. "Did you fix it?" "I told the truth," he replied. "The house did the rest." She didn't say anything for a long time. Just stood there, swaying slightly, like the wind, and her thoughts were both pulling her in different directions. "Then my brother died in that house. Years ago. They said he ran away." Ellis nodded slowly. "What was his name?" "Caleb." He opened the notebook, flipped back through the pages. There it was, written in sharp ink. "Caleb Moore disappeared 2009 to ran away, scratched out. Truth basement stairs collapsed. No search, no records, only silence." She stepped beside him. "Read the lines." And then, without asking, she placed her hand on the page. "I thought I imagined him," she whispered. That no one else remembered. "You didn't imagine him," Ellis said. "He was waiting." She looked up at him. "What now?" He looked down at the notebook, then back at her. "You keep remembering," he said, "even when it hurts. Especially then." She nodded, bit her lip, and slowly, carefully, she reached into her backpack and pulled out a photograph. A Polaroid. Her and Caleb, faces squished together, grinning. She slid it into the notebook between two pages. "Keep it safe." Ellis watched her walk away. Head high, shoulders straight. Something in the way she moved made the air feel lighter. He sat for a long time after that, watching the road, the clouds, the stretch of blue sky widening above the treetops. The house had let go, but it had left something behind. Not just stories, responsibility. He didn't need to write another word, but he knew he would. Not for ghosts, not for closure, but for reminders. The kind that can only come from telling the truth, again and again, until forgetting is no longer possible. He stood, notebook under his arm, eyes on the horizon. The house stayed behind, silent, at peace, but not forgotten, never forgotten. To be continued. Ellis didn't head home. He didn't even know where home was now. Not really. The old house behind him wasn't his anymore, if it ever had been. It had opened itself, confessed, screamed, wept, and quieted. Now it belonged to the stories inside it and to the people who still needed it. Ellis had walked through the last of its memories, but memory had a strange way of lingering in places people didn't expect. And so he walked, not to run, but to carry. The stories, the weight, the responsibility. The notebook was lighter now, but only in the physical sense. Emotionally, it had thickened with purpose. Each page pulsed in his hand, as though the ink inside it hadn't yet dried, like the truth could still breathe. The wind had begun to pick up again, tugging at leaves, stirring gutters, whistling through wires like it was trying to get his attention. But it no longer felt ominous. It felt like communication. Not voices, not ghosts. Just a presence that knew it was finally being heard. He stopped when he reached the edge of town. There, by the sign half swallowed by vines, Mueralti Lake Mendipop 4219, he saw something unexpected. A small table, folded chairs, a white canopy overhead, yellowed by time, and a handwritten cardboard sign ducked, taped to the front, Siam Unit Is Piero Jasti Shario Ur Memorai. At first, Ellis thought it was a setup, a trap, some haunted mirror of his own idea. But there were people sitting there. Quiet, normal people. An old man with skin like tree bark, sipping from a thermos. A woman with an overstuffed binder of papers in her lap, labeled in neat rows, moments we forgot. A teenager scrolling through a phone, but glancing up every time someone walked by. Each of them guarded, but present. And then a man, maybe in his 40s, stepped up to the table and placed something down. A photo. Of a house, not Ellis's, but one that looked similar. Too similar. Ellis approached. He didn't ask. He just watched. The man cleared his throat. "She died here," he said, barely above a whisper. "They said it was an accident. I always thought it wasn't. But I didn't know how to talk about it. Not until I heard about that other house, the Grady one." Ellis blinked. Someone had noticed. The story had spread. He stepped closer, feeling his pulse quicken, not in fear, but in recognition. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, he felt like he wasn't carrying the notebook alone. The woman with the binder looked up. "You here to share something?" Ellis hesitated. Then he nodded.
Yeah,
"I think I am." She patted the chair next to her. "Then sit. We've got time." He took the seat, opened the notebook, flipped to the back, where the blank pages had started again. He turned one over, revealing the last page he'd written, the one labeled Legacy. The woman leaned over, squinting. "That your daughter?" He nodded. "She's beautiful." "She was more than that," he said. "She still is." And then he began to speak. He didn't read from the notebook. He told. The way you tell a friend. A stranger who earns your trust simply by listening well enough. He told them about the house, about the sounds in the walls, about the names that vanished from public record, about the ink that bled like memory, about the attic full of unopened letters, about the girl who knocked on the door and disappeared again, about the shame, the silence, the mirror version of himself who asked the question he was too afraid to answer. And when he was done, no one clapped. No one praised. They just nodded. One by one, as if to say we have stories too. The man with the thermos spoke next, about a sibling who was never mentioned at family gatherings. The teen shared a story about a friend who moved away, but really didn't. The woman read a letter her grandmother had written in 1973 that had never been mailed, full of apologies for secrets never told. Each story layered onto the last, not building a tower, building a net, to hold everything that had been too heavy for one person alone. By the time the sun began to set, the table was surrounded. More chairs, more stories, photos, letters, crumpled napkins with scribbled notes. People didn't need to believe in ghosts to feel haunted. They just needed to know it was okay to speak. As dusk fell, someone produced candles. Small, cheap tea lights. One by one, they lit them and placed them on the table, until the soft glow painted the faces around it in gold. Ellis sat in silence. Not alone. Never again alone. He glanced down at the notebook. It had opened itself to a fresh page, and across the top, in unfamiliar handwriting, a sentence had formed. Echoes only fade when someone answers. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just wrote. For the first time, not to exorcise or uncover or confess, but to record. Because stories deserve to live somewhere other than in fear. And maybe the house had taught him how. He looked up at the flickering candles, at the crowd growing without fanfare or spectacle, at the way people leaned in when others spoke, and he understood something. The house had been the beginning, but the voices were everywhere. And now, finally they were speaking. By morning, the table was gone, not dismantled, gone, as if the night itself had picked it up gently and carried it into the air. In its place, only footprints and wax puddles remained, little glassy scars in the pavement from where the tea lights had burned down. The air smelled like burnt paper and wet earth. Ellis stood in the same spot he had the night before, notebook clutched under one arm, unsure if he had dreamed it all. But then he heard it. A rustle of pages, soft and familiar, coming not from the notebook in his hand, but from all around him. As if the world itself had opened 100 books and begun to read. He opened the notebook again, though he didn't need to. The next page had written itself in his sleep. One sentence. Just one. It never ends. And that's the point. He read it 3 times, each time expecting it to mean something different, something deeper or darker. But it didn't change. It stayed true. The story didn't end with the final line. Stories like this never did. They echoed, warped, shifted. They planted roots in people and grew sideways. What mattered wasn't that they ended. What mattered was that they kept being told. His hands, once shaking when he'd first begun to write, were now steady. Scarred, yes, and aged more than the weeks allowed, but steady. He ran a finger down the edge of the page and felt a warmth there, like the notebook itself was still alive, still listening, still waiting. It didn't want to close. Not yet, maybe not ever. Behind him, the town was waking up. He could hear it in the way doors opened, not slamming, not rushed, but soft, like people no longer feared what they'd find on the other side. For the first time in years, the wind didn't carry dread or memory. It carried stories. Ones people were finally ready to share. Ellis walked slowly, not toward the house, not away from it. Just forward. With every step, he felt a strange hum in the soles of his feet, as if the land remembered too. Not just his land, everyone's. All those buried truths, half-told tales, names that had only lived in margins and whispers. They were everywhere. And now they were rising. He passed a fence where someone had tied a note with twine. I forgive you. No name, no explanation. Just a sentence scrawled in rushed pen. He passed a window where a photo was taped to the glass. 2 boys on bikes grinning. Below it, someone had written, he mattered. He still does. On the steps of a church, he saw a pile of envelopes, all unsealed. Letters to mothers, brothers, lost friends, dead daughters. The town had turned itself into a living archive overnight. The house on Grady Street hadn't just released its ghosts. It had taught people how to listen to their own. Ellis kept walking until he reached a bench near the lake, the same lake that had once been cordoned off with yellow tape after a girl went missing in '89. He remembered her name now. Talia. He'd written her into the notebook already, and now her name was etched into a wooden plaque on the bench. Not as a warning, as a reminder. He sat down and stared across the water. It didn't shimmer, it didn't reflect anything special. But it held something. Weight. Memory. Stillness. He placed the notebook beside him, open to its last page. Then he picked up the pen, and for the first time, he didn't write a name. He wrote a question. If you found this, what will you do with it? The ink dried fast, like the page already knew it was complete. He stared at it for a long while. Then he stood, left the notebook on the bench, and walked away. Not to escape, not to forget, but to make room for someone else to answer the question. Behind him, the wind flipped the page once more. And then again, until the back cover pressed gently against the final entry, not closing the story, just pausing it, because someone, somewhere, would need it again, and when they did, it would be there, waiting the end for now.